Picture this. You're walking down a familiar street when someone approaches you with a simple question that changes everything. They ask you to identify whether a painting is real or fake, whether a diamond is genuine or synthetic, whether a person is telling enough, right? But here's the twist. The truth or lying. Simple. Your answer doesn't just determine whether you pass or fail some random test. It determines whether you're ready to join an exclusive club that's been operating in secret for thousands of years. Now scale that scenario up to cosmic proportions. What if humanity has been taking the most important test in our species' history without even realizing it? What if objects we've been calling comets and asteroids are actually carefully designed examinations, each one calibrated to measure our intellectual maturity and readiness for something far greater than we've ever imagined? On July 1st, 2025, astronomers discovered something that shouldn't exist. An object designated 3I/Atlas appeared in our telescopes, masquerading as an ordinary comet from interstellar space. But this visitor brought with it a collection of impossibilities that would make even the most creative science fiction writer blush. It glows in the wrong direction. It shows no chemical signatures that should exist. Its arrival timing defies mathematical probability, yet our scientific establishment continues to call it a comet. This isn't just about astronomy anymore. This is about whether we're intelligent enough to recognize intelligence when it's deliberately hiding in plain sight. What you're about to discover will challenge everything you think you know about our place in the universe. Because if 3I Atlas represents what I suspect it does, then we're not the examiners in this cosmic equation. We're the ones being examined. And frankly, we might be failing. The story begins with something that should have been impossible, but happened anyway. When 3I Atlas first appeared in our detection systems, it seemed familiar enough. A fuzzy, distant object drifting through space with what appeared to be the classic signature of a comet. Scientists around the world breathed a collective sigh of relief. Here was another cosmic visitor, certainly interesting for study, but nothing that would keep them awake at night questioning the fundamental laws of physics. Then they looked closer. The first anomaly hit them like a scientific brick wall. The dust cloud surrounding 3I Atlas wasn't where it should be. Instead of trailing behind the object like the tail of every comet in human experience, this luminous envelope preceded it. The object was quite literally glowing ahead of itself, as if some invisible force was stripping material from its leading edge while leaving its trailing side completely untouched. This was more than unusual. This was impossible. Comets develop tails through a process so fundamental to astronomy that it's taught in introductory physics courses. Solar radiation heats their icy nucleus, causing sublimation that creates a streaming effect, always pointing away from the sun. The physics are straightforward, predictable, and have never been violated by any natural object we've studied. Yet here was 3I Atlas, apparently operating by a completely different set of rules. The spectroscopic analysis that followed turned the mystery into something approaching scientific horror. Every legitimate comet produces detectable signatures of water vapor, carbon monoxide, and various other gases as its ice sublimates under solar heating. These molecular fingerprints are as fundamental to cometary identification as blood types are to medical diagnosis. 3I Atlas showed absolutely none of them. Zero water vapor, no molecular signatures of any gases that should be streaming from a genuine comet in our solar system. It was producing a glowing dust cloud through processes that apparently didn't exist according to our understanding of chemistry and physics. But wait, it gets worse. The object's brightness presented another puzzle wrapped in statistical impossibility. Based on how much light it reflected and assuming typical comet surface properties, 3I Atlas would need to measure approximately 20 kilometers across to produce the illumination we observed. Objects of this massive size arriving from interstellar space are extraordinarily rare. We should encounter such a statistical outlier perhaps once every 10,000 years, if current astronomical models are even remotely accurate. What were the odds that such a cosmic rarity would arrive during the brief historical window when humanity possessed the technology to detect and study it? The mathematics were deeply uncomfortable for anyone who preferred their universe to make sense. The trajectory analysis revealed even more troubling anomalies that pushed coincidence theory beyond any reasonable breaking point. 3. I-Atlas was traveling on what astronomers call a retrograde orbit, moving backward relative to the general rotation of our solar system. While not impossible for natural objects, this characteristic occurs in roughly 0.2% of interstellar visitors. Already, we were dealing with a statistical outlier. But retrograde motion was just the beginning of the mathematical nightmare. The object's orbital plane aligned almost perfectly with our solar system's ecliptic, the flat disk where Earth and the other planets circle our Sun. For a truly random interstellar visitor, this alignment should occur with a probability of approximately 0.2%. Rare, but theoretically possible. The timing of its arrival, however, catapulted the situation into the realm of astronomical impossibility. 3. I-Atlas would pass near Mars, then Venus, then Jupiter, in a sequence of planetary encounters choreographed with precision that would make NASA's mission planners weep with envy. Computer calculations revealed that the probability of such perfect timing occurring by pure chance measured approximately 0.0005%. Let me put that in perspective for you. Imagine throwing a dart blindfolded at a map of the United States and hitting not just a specific city, but a specific building, on a specific floor, in a specific room, at a specific time when a particular person happens to be sitting in a particular chair. The mathematical odds of 3 I-Atlas's arrival parameters occurring naturally are roughly comparable to such impossible accuracy, yet the astronomical community's response was remarkably uniform and unwavering. Comet. Definitely a comet. Unusual perhaps, but well within the bounds of natural variation that we should expect from objects originating around other stars. The anomalies were systematically explained away with increasingly creative interpretations that stretched the boundaries of known physics. The backwards glow became evidence of exotic sublimation mechanics never before observed. The absent molecular signatures got attributed to unusual ice compositions that violated everything met chemistry. Each we thought we knew about co-impossibility spawned its own theoretical framework, designed specifically to avoid acknowledging the elephant in the room. This pattern of creative explanation in the face of mounting impossibilities echoes through scientific history with disturbing familiarity. In 1794, German physicist Ernst Chladni dared to suggest that meteorites actually fell from outer space. The European scientific establishment's response was swift and morose dismissal, professional ostracism, the very silence. Ridiculous idea that stones could fall from the heavens violated every principle of rational thought. For nearly a decade, Chladni's hypothesis languished in the realm of scientific heresy. Then, in 1803, the sky exploded over L'Aigle, France. Thousands of witnesses watched a brilliant fireball streak across the afternoon sky before detonating in a thunderous explosion. In the aftermath, investigators found the countryside littered with still warm stones bearing unmistakable signatures of extraterrestrial origin. Reality had refused to conform to professional expectations. The stones did indeed fall from space, exactly as the ridiculed Chladni had claimed. The parallel with our current situation is unsettling. When confronted with phenomena that challenge established worldviews, our first instinct isn't curiosity, but dismissal. The anomaly must be wrong. The data must be flawed. The observer must be mistaken. Anything except the terrifying possibility that our carefully constructed understanding of reality might need fundamental revision. But here's where the 3 I-Atlas story takes a darker turn. Unlike Chladni's meteorites, which eventually forced acceptance through overwhelming evidence, this anomaly comes with a ticking clock. If the object represents some form of evaluation or contact attempt, then our window for appropriate response might be severely limited. We might not have decades to gradually overcome our professional prejudices and institutional inertia. The evidence suggests we're being tested on our ability to recognize artificial intelligence when it deliberately disguises itself as natural phenomena. Each interstellar visitor of the past decade has arrived with slightly different characteristics, as if someone were gradually turning up the volume on a signal, waiting to see when we'll finally stop pretending we can't hear it. First came Oumuamua in 2017, the cigar-shaped visitor that accelerated impossibly through our solar system while showing none of the gas signatures that should accompany such behavior. We struggled to classify it, ultimately settling on creative explanations that strained physics rather than consider artificial alternatives. Then our own technology taught us uncomfortable lessons about how easily artificial objects can masquerade as natural ones. When SpaceX launched Elon Musk's Tesla Roadster into space, it briefly appeared on asteroid detection networks as an unknown object. The 2020 ESO incident proved even more embarrassing when we initially classified a piece of 1960s rocket debris as a natural asteroid, complete with the exact acceleration characteristics we deemed impossible for Oumuamua. Now, 3i Atlas arrives with anomalies so blatant that even our most creative explanation mechanisms struggle to contain them. The backwards glow, the missing molecular signatures, the mathematically impossible trajectory timing, each impossibility more pronounced than anything we encountered with previous visitors. These aren't isolated incidents. They're chapters in a larger narrative that becomes coherent only when viewed as a designed progression rather than random occurrence. The pattern suggests escalating difficulty, like a cosmic curriculum designed to test our intellectual evolution. Oumuamua was the introductory course, strange enough to intrigue, but ambiguous enough to dismiss. Its acceleration could be rationalized through exotic sublimation physics, its unusual proportions explained through unlikely but theoretically possible formation scenarios. 3i Atlas represents what may be the final examination. Its characteristics are so impossible to reconcile with natural origins that explaining it away requires intellectual contortions that would be comical if the stakes weren't potentially so high. The object forces a choice between increasingly improbable coincidences and the obvious alternative we've been trained to avoid considering. But here's where the pattern becomes truly unsettling. The escalating difficulty suggests intentional design. Random cosmic visitors shouldn't arrive with perfectly calibrated levels of anomaly that correspond precisely to humanity's technological and intellectual development. Yet, that's exactly what we're observing. Each visitor arrives at exactly the moment we're capable of detecting and analyzing its impossibilities. The timing isn't random, it's pedagogical. Someone or something appears to be pacing these encounters to match our readiness for each successive level of challenge. This realization transforms our entire understanding of what we've been witnessing. We're not passive observers of cosmic coincidence. We're active participants in a designed evaluation sequence. The universe isn't randomly throwing anomalies at us to see how we respond. Something is carefully orchestrating these encounters to test specific aspects of our intellectual development. The implications are staggering. We may have been under observation far longer than we've been capable of observing ourselves. Our cognitive strengths and weaknesses, our cultural biases, our institutional blind spots, all mapped with scientific precision by intelligences that understand human psychology better than we understand ourselves. The evaluation appears designed to test precisely the qualities that genuine contact would require. Can we recognize intelligence when it deliberately obscures its nature behind familiar facades? Do we possess the intellectual humility to abandon comfortable assumptions when presented with contradictory evidence? Are we capable of paradigm shifts that expand rather than merely rearrange our understanding of reality? These characteristics separate mature civilizations from primitive ones. They distinguish genuine scientists from mere technicians. They identify species ready for galactic citizenship from those still trapped in narrow, self-centered worldviews. But here's the truly sobering part. So far, we're failing spectacularly. Look at how we've responded to each test case. When Oumuamua displayed impossible acceleration without visible propulsion, we invented exotic theories about hydrogen outgassing that had never been observed before. When it showed extreme geometry unlike any natural object, we proposed formation mechanisms that existed nowhere in our models of planetary system evolution. When our own technology fooled us completely, proving that artificial objects can indeed masquerade as natural ones, we learned the lesson for exactly as long as it took us to forget it again. The moment 3I Atlas arrived with even more pronounced anomalies, we immediately reverted to the same pattern of creative denial. This isn't just scientific conservatism, this is cognitive dysfunction at a civilizational level. Dr. Avi Loeb, Harvard's former astronomy chairman, represents a fascinating outlier in this pattern. His willingness to suggest artificial origins for anomalous interstellar objects has earned him ridicule from colleagues who seem more invested in maintaining professional respectability than exploring uncomfortable possibilities. But what if Loeb's approach represents exactly what the test is designed to identify? The intellectual courage to consider possibilities that threaten established paradigms. The humility to admit when our models might be inadequate. The wisdom to follow evidence rather than institutional pressure. His persistent advocacy for artificial explanations isn't career-threatening speculation. It's precisely the kind of paradigm-challenging thinking that genuine contact would require. Meanwhile, the mainstream response reveals precisely the cognitive rigidity that might disqualify a species from larger cosmic participation. When presented with mathematical impossibilities masquerading as natural phenomena, we choose comfortable explanations over uncomfortable evidence. This failure pattern extends far beyond astronomy into every domain where evidence challenges familiar assumptions. Climate change presents overwhelming data demanding fundamental changes to industrial civilization. Yet we continue seeking technological fixes that avoid uncomfortable lifestyle modifications. Artificial intelligence development proceeds with minimal safety oversight because acknowledging genuine risk requires admitting we might be creating something beyond our control. The pattern repeats endlessly. We explain away rather than explain toward. We dismiss rather than investigate. We protect familiar worldviews rather than expand toward unfamiliar possibilities. If advanced civilizations are evaluating our readiness for contact, they're documenting a species that consistently demonstrates intellectual immaturity when confronted with paradigm-challenging realities. We show remarkable technological sophistication coupled with psychological rigidity. This combination might be exactly what makes a species dangerous rather than valuable as a cosmic participant. The implications extend beyond first contact scenarios into existential risk assessment. A species that cannot recognize obvious artificial intelligence when it announces itself through carefully orchestrated impossibilities probably isn't ready to handle contact with genuinely advanced civilizations. Imagine the cultural shock that direct contact would create if we can't even acknowledge indirect contact when it presents itself through subtle anomalies. The psychological disruption could destabilize entire societies built on assumptions about human uniqueness and cosmic isolation. Our cosmic evaluators may be protecting us from contact we're not mature enough to handle. The gradual escalation of anomalous visitors could represent careful assessment of our readiness threshold, with each test case calibrated to measure specific aspects of our intellectual and psychological development. The verdict so far appears to be clear: not yet ready. still too attached to comfortable assumptions, still too resistant to evidence that challenges familiar paradigms, still too invested in human-centered worldviews to handle the reality of a universe populated by intelligence far more advanced than our own. But here's what makes this even more disturbing. The same cognitive rigidity that prevents us from recognizing artificial visitors also impairs our ability to respond appropriately to other existential challenges. Consider how our response to 3I Atlas parallels our approach to asteroid impact risk. We know large impacts have caused mass extinctions throughout Earth's history. We have the technology to detect and potentially deflect dangerous objects. Yet we invest minimal resources in comprehensive planetary defense because the threat feels too remote and abstract to motivate immediate action. We consistently underestimate low probability, high consequence events that require uncomfortable changes to familiar systems. We prefer incremental improvements within existing frameworks over fundamental revisions that acknowledge genuinely novel threats. This cognitive pattern suggests that humanity's cosmic report card reflects broader intellectual limitations that constrain our ability to navigate an increasingly complex and dangerous universe. We are a species with remarkable technological capabilities, but persistent psychological blind spots that prevent us from using those capabilities wisely. We can build spacecraft that reach other planets, but we can't acknowledge spacecraft from other planets when they visit us. We can detect radio signals from the edge of the observable universe, but we can't recognize artificial signals when they're broadcast from objects passing through our own solar system. We can sequence genomes and manipulate matter at the atomic level, but we can't overcome cognitive biases that our ancestors developed when the biggest threat was remembering which berries were poisonous. The intelligence being measured by 3I Atlas isn't computational or instrumental, it's wisdom. The ability to recognize when fundamental assumptions need revision. The intellectual humility to acknowledge ignorance rather than defend false knowledge. The courage to consider possibilities that expand rather than merely rearrange our understanding of reality. These characteristics determine not just our readiness for cosmic citizenship, but our likelihood of surviving the challenges that technological advancement inevitably creates. Species that cannot adapt their worldviews to accommodate new realities tend to be eliminated by those realities through mechanisms that care nothing about technological sophistication or institutional complexity. The test results from 3I Atlas suggest we might be exactly such a species. Technologically capable, but cognitively inflexible. Instrumentally powerful, but intellectually immature. This combination represents perhaps the most dangerous evolutionary configuration possible. Sufficient capability to create existential risks, coupled with insufficient wisdom to manage them safely. Our cosmic observers may be documenting the decline phase of a civilization that achieved impressive technological development, but failed to achieve the intellectual maturation necessary for long-term survival. They might be watching a species approach what researchers call the Great Filter, the evolutionary bottleneck that eliminates most technological civilizations before they achieve true cosmic significance. But the examination isn't over yet. 3I Atlas continues its impossible journey through our solar system, presenting us with ongoing opportunities to demonstrate intellectual growth. Each day we maintain comfortable explanations, despite mounting evidence, becomes another recorded failure. But each day also offers another chance to acknowledge what the evidence actually reveals. The choice facing humanity isn't just about astronomical interpretation, it's about whether we can evolve beyond the cognitive limitations that have constrained our species throughout recorded history. Can we learn to embrace anomalies as opportunities for paradigm expansion rather than threats to be explained away? Can we develop the intellectual courage necessary to abandon familiar assumptions when reality refuses to conform to them? These questions determine not just our relationship with potential cosmic neighbors, but our species' fundamental viability in a universe that operates according to principles we haven't yet learned to acknowledge. The historical precedent is both encouraging and terrifying. Every major scientific breakthrough began with someone willing to take anomalous data seriously. Galileo's telescopic observations of Jupiter's moons, Darwin's puzzling finch variations in the Galapagos, Einstein's thought experiments about riding light beams, all emerged from individuals who chose curiosity over comfort when confronted with phenomena that didn't fit established models. But history also shows us the cost of resistance to paradigm shifts. The Catholic Church's persecution of Galileo delayed acceptance of heliocentrism by centuries. The medical establishment's rejection of germ theory cost countless lives through continued practices that spread disease. The geological community's dismissal of continental drift set back our understanding of plate tectonics by decades. In each case, institutional inertia created suffering that could have been avoided if intellectual humility had prevailed over defensive pride. Now we face what might be the ultimate paradigm shift. Not just a revision of astronomical theory, but a fundamental reconceptualization of our cosmic significance. Are we ready for such a transformation? Or will we repeat the historical pattern of resistance until reality forces acceptance? The mathematics surrounding 3I Atlas grow more uncomfortable with each passing day. As the object continues its precisely choreographed dance through our solar system, additional impossibilities compound the statistical nightmare. Consider the thermal properties that have emerged from continued observation. Natural comets follow predictable heating patterns as they approach the Sun. Their surface temperatures rise according to well-established equations that account for solar distance, surface composition, and thermal conductivity. 3I Atlas violates these principles with casual indifference to physics. Infrared observations reveal temperature distributions that make no sense for a natural object. Instead of the gradual warming expected from solar heating, the visitor displays thermal patterns that suggest internal energy sources operating independently of our star's influence. More disturbing still are the subtle course corrections that precision tracking has revealed. These aren't the chaotic perturbations expected from outgassing or radiation pressure. They're deliberate adjustments that optimize the object's trajectory for maximum observational opportunity from Earth-based telescopes. It's as if something is actively steering 3I Atlas to maintain perfect viewing conditions for human astronomers. The navigational precision required for such adjustments would challenge our most sophisticated spacecraft. Yet we're expected to believe random natural processes achieved this level of control. The spectroscopic silence grows more profound with each analysis. Advanced instruments capable of detecting molecular signatures at parts per billion concentrations find absolutely nothing that should accompany the object's alleged cometary activity. It's producing effects without causes, displaying symptoms without underlying processes. Imagine discovering a campfire that produces light and heat but shows no evidence of combustion. No smoke, no chemical byproducts, no consumption of fuel. You could invoke exotic physics to explain such a phenomenon. But at what point does invoking the exotic become more extraordinary than accepting the obvious? Yet our scientific institutions continue demonstrating remarkable creativity in avoiding obvious conclusions. Each new impossibility spawns fresh theoretical frameworks designed to preserve natural explanations, regardless of how many miracles those explanations require. The sublimation hypothesis has evolved into something resembling theological doctrine. True believers invoke increasingly exotic ice compositions, radiation processing mechanisms, and thermal dynamics that exist nowhere else in solar system science. The theory requires constant revision to accommodate each new anomaly, yet somehow maintains credibility through sheer institutional momentum. This pattern reveals something deeply troubling about how modern science handles paradigm-threatening data. Instead of following evidence toward uncomfortable conclusions, we're following comfort toward increasingly implausible explanations. The resistance isn't just professional, it's psychological. Acknowledging that 3I Atlas might be artificial would require abandoning fundamental assumptions about humanity's cosmic significance. We would need to accept that intelligence elsewhere has achieved technological capabilities that dwarf our proudest accomplishments. More unsettling still, we would need to confront the possibility that this intelligence has been observing us, studying our behavior, evaluating our responses to carefully designed stimuli. The implications for human autonomy and cosmic privacy are staggering. Are we truly alone with our thoughts and decisions? Or have we been living in a kind of cosmic laboratory where every choice becomes data in someone else's experiment? The timing patterns embedded in recent interstellar visitors support this laboratory hypothesis with uncomfortable precision. When astronomers reconstruct the launch windows required for each object to arrive at its observed time, assuming reasonable interstellar travel velocities, they find correlations with Earth's broadcast history that seem too precise to be coincidental. Oumuamua's trajectory suggests departure from its origin point around 1975, precisely when humanity's most powerful radio transmissions were reaching nearby star systems. The visitor arrived just as we developed capabilities to detect and analyze its impossible characteristics. 3I Atlas appears to have been dispatched around the time our deep space communication networks came online. Its arrival coincides perfectly with our technological readiness to document its anomalies in unprecedented detail. These aren't casual correlations. They suggest systematic monitoring of human technological development with response times calibrated to our growing sophistication. Someone has been watching us evolve, timing their interventions to match our readiness for each successive revelation. But readiness for what exactly? Contact, evaluation, invitation to something larger than our current understanding can encompass. The answer might depend on how we respond to the tests we're apparently taking. Do we demonstrate intellectual courage by acknowledging obvious artificial origins? Or do we retreat into defensive denial that preserves comfortable assumptions at the cost of truth? Our collective response so far suggests we're failing these examinations with disturbing consistency. When presented with clear evidence of non-human technology, we choose familiar explanations that require multiple miracles over unfamiliar explanations that require only reasonable assumptions about technological development. This failure pattern extends beyond astronomy into every domain where evidence challenges established paradigms. We're a species that consistently chooses psychological comfort over intellectual honesty when the stakes involve fundamental worldview revision. Consider how we've handled other paradigm-threatening discoveries throughout history. When quantum mechanics revealed that reality operates on principles that violate common sense, we spent decades trying to restore classical intuitions rather than accepting quantum weirdness. When DNA analysis revealed that humans share common ancestry with all life on Earth, we invented increasingly complex theological frameworks to preserve special creation myths rather than embrace evolutionary unity. When climate data demonstrated that industrial civilization is altering planetary systems, we sought technological fixes that avoid lifestyle changes rather than acknowledge the need for fundamental economic transformation. The pattern is always the same. Evidence emerges that challenges comfortable assumptions. Institutions resist through creative reinterpretation. Reality eventually forces acceptance, but only after enormous waste of time, energy, and opportunity. With 3I Atlas, we might not have the luxury of gradual acceptance. If the object represents evaluation rather than mere curiosity, then our response window could be critically limited. Observers assessing our readiness for contact might not wait decades for us to overcome institutional inertia. They might be documenting our current response as final evidence of intellectual immaturity. Our inability to recognize obvious artificial intelligence could mark us as cognitively rigid, too psychologically inflexible to handle contact with genuinely advanced civilizations. The stakes extend far beyond first contact scenarios. The same cognitive failures that prevent us from acknowledging 3I Atlas also impair our ability to navigate other existential challenges facing our civilization. Nuclear weapons proliferation proceeds with minimal international coordination because acknowledging genuine extinction risk requires admitting that national sovereignty might need fundamental limitation. Biotechnology development accelerates without comprehensive safety frameworks because recognizing dual-use potential demands uncomfortable restrictions on scientific freedom. Space debris accumulation threatens all satellite infrastructure, yet we continue launching objects without mandatory cleanup protocols because long-term thinking conflicts with short-term profits. Every major challenge confronting humanity requires exactly the kind of paradigm-shifting wisdom that recognizing 3I Atlas would demonstrate. Our failure to acknowledge obvious artificial intelligence in space correlates directly with our failure to address obvious threats to civilization on Earth. We are a species with remarkable problem-solving capabilities, but persistent blind spots that prevent us from applying most. We can sequence those capabilities to problems that matter genomes, but can't prevent pandemics. We can build supercomputers, but can't manage algorithmic bias. We can split atoms, but can't prevent nuclear accidents. The pattern reveals fundamental limitations in human cognition that transcend any particular domain. We're excellent at technical challenges within established frameworks, but terrible at recognizing when those frameworks need replacement. This cognitive profile might be exactly what cosmic observers are evaluating. Not our computational abilities or instrumental sophistication, but our wisdom. Our readiness to engage with realities that exceed our current understanding. The intelligence behind 3I Atlas may be offering us precisely the kind of paradigm-expanding encounter that genuine intellectual maturation requires. Whether we choose to accept this opportunity or continue retreating into comfortable denial could determine everything about our cosmic future. The examination continues with each impossible day that 3I Atlas maintains its backward glow through our solar system. Every creative explanation that avoids acknowledging artificial origins becomes another answer on a test we might not realize we're taking. But tests can be retaken. Grades can be improved. Species can evolve. The question facing humanity is whether we possess the intellectual courage necessary to abandon familiar assumptions when reality refuses to conform to them, whether we can choose evidence over comfort, truth over convenience, growth over stagnation. Our cosmic report card remains unfinished. The final grades haven't been submitted. But time is running short, and the observers are still watching, still documenting our choices, still evaluating whether we demonstrate the wisdom necessary for graduation into whatever larger community exists among the stars. The next move is ours. The question is whether we're finally ready to make it. The mathematics don't lie, but sometimes we wish they would. As 3I Atlas continues its impossible journey through our solar system, each new observation adds another layer to what's becoming the most compelling case for artificial intelligence that humanity has ever encountered. Yet somehow, we keep finding ways to look the other way. Let me walk you through what's been happening in the months since this object first appeared on our detection systems. Because what we're witnessing isn't just astronomical anomaly, it's a masterclass in cognitive dissonance playing out on a civilizational scale. Remember those thermal readings I mentioned? They've gotten worse, or better, depending on your perspective on whether we're dealing with natural phenomena or something far more sophisticated. Advanced infrared telescopes have been tracking 3I Atlas as it moves through different distances from our Sun, and the results are keeping physicists awake at night. Natural objects in space follow what we call the inverse square law for thermal radiation. Double the distance from the Sun, and you get 1/4 the heating. It's basic physics that governs everything from planetary temperatures to spacecraft thermal management. 3I Atlas apparently never got the memo. Instead of following predictable heating patterns, this object displays what can only be described as thermal regulation. Its surface temperature remains remarkably stable across vast changes in solar distance. as if something inside is actively managing heat distribution. Imagine wearing a jacket that keeps you at exactly 72 degrees, whether you're in Alaska or Arizona. That's essentially what we're observing here. The engineering implications are staggering. Active thermal management at the level we're detecting would require sophisticated systems operating continuously across interstellar distances. We're talking about technology that makes our most advanced spacecraft look like Stone Age tools by comparison. But here's where the story gets really interesting. The navigation adjustments I mentioned earlier. They're not random course corrections. They're strategic positioning maneuvers that optimize viewing angles from Earth-based observatories. It's as if something is actively ensuring we get the best possible look at its capabilities. Professional astronomers have documented at least 17 distinct trajectory modifications since 3I Atlas entered our solar system, each one perfectly timed to maintain ideal observation geometry as Earth rotates and orbits around the Sun. The precision required for such adjustments would challenge our most sophisticated mission control systems, yet we're expected to believe random outgassing achieved this level of navigational accuracy. The spectroscopic silence has become even more profound with continued observation. Every major observatory on Earth has pointed their most sensitive instruments at this object, searching for any trace of the molecular signatures that should accompany its alleged cometary activity. The results are consistently the same, absolutely nothing. It's like studying a campfire that produces light and heat but shows no evidence of combustion, no chemical byproducts, no molecular signatures of any known process that could explain the observed effects. Just impossible results that our most advanced instruments confirm with frustrating precision. Meanwhile, the creative explanations from mainstream astronomy have evolved into something approaching performance art. Each new impossibility spawns fresh theoretical frameworks designed to preserve natural interpretations, regardless of how many physical laws those interpretations need to bend. The latest hypothesis involves something called differential outgassing from exotic ice compositions that exist nowhere else in solar system science. According to this theory, 3I Atlas contains precisely the right mixture of rare compounds to produce backwards glowing effects without detectable molecular signatures, while maintaining perfect thermal regulation and executing precision navigation adjustments. The probability of such a perfect storm of exotic properties occurring naturally in a single object approaches mathematical impossibility. Yet somehow, this explanation maintains credibility within professional circles, because it avoids the one interpretation that actually fits all the data. But let's step back from the technical details for a moment and consider the bigger picture. Because what we're witnessing with 3I Atlas might be just the latest chapter in a much larger story that's been unfolding for decades. Think about how this fits into the pattern of recent interstellar visitors. Each one has arrived with characteristics slightly more anomalous than the last, as if someone were gradually increasing the obviousness of artificial signatures while watching to see how we respond. Oumuamua in 2017 was subtle enough that we could explain away its impossible acceleration through creative physics. The Tesla Roadster and 2020 SO incidents taught us that artificial objects can indeed masquerade as natural ones, but we conveniently forgot those lessons the moment 3I Atlas appeared. Now we're dealing with an object so obviously artificial that maintaining natural explanations requires believing in coincidences that violate basic probability theory. Yet our institutional response remains locked in denial mode, as if acknowledging the obvious would somehow threaten the foundations of scientific credibility. This pattern reveals something deeply troubling about how modern science handles paradigm-threatening discoveries. Instead of following evidence toward uncomfortable conclusions, we're following comfort toward increasingly implausible explanations. We've created a system that rewards conformity over curiosity, institutional loyalty over intellectual honesty. Consider how young scientists learn to navigate academic careers. Graduate students quickly discover that controversial interpretations can derail dissertation progress. Postdoctoral researchers understand that speculative hypotheses threaten future employment prospects. Even tenured professors protect their reputations by avoiding ideas that might be perceived as fringe or unserious. This creates systematic pressure toward intellectual conformity that has nothing to do with evidence quality or logical reasoning. The most paradigm-threatening discoveries often come from outsiders who have less investment in maintaining established interpretations and more freedom to consider uncomfortable possibilities. Dr. Avi Loeb's role in the 3-Eye Atlas controversy exemplifies this dynamic perfectly. His willingness to suggest artificial origins for anomalous objects represents exactly the kind of intellectual courage that paradigm shifts require. But institutional structures actively discourage. The backlash against Loeb's interpretations reveals the emotional stakes embedded in these discussions. Critics don't simply disagree with his analysis. They question his scientific judgment, his professional competence, his right to serious consideration. The personal attacks suggest that more than astronomy is being defended here. What's being protected is an entire worldview built on assumptions about humanity's cosmic significance. We are the pinnacle of intelligence in our local galactic neighborhood. Technology is primitive and rare. The universe consists primarily of rocks and gas, with occasional natural phenomena to catalogue and explain. The possibility that intelligence might be common, that technology might be subtle, that the universe might be populated by observers we haven't learned to recognize represents a fundamental threat to these anthropocentric assumptions. This psychological investment in familiar interpretations creates a kind of institutional blindness to genuinely revolutionary possibilities. The very mechanisms designed to protect science from error can become obstacles to accepting truths that require paradigm revision. But here's the really unsettling part. The resistance patterns we're observing might be exactly what any cosmic evaluation is designed to measure. If advanced civilizations are testing our readiness for contact, they would want to assess our response to paradigm-challenging data. Do we demonstrate intellectual humility and curiosity when confronted with impossible phenomena? Or do we retreat into defensive denial that preserves comfortable assumptions at the cost of truth? The timing of 3-Eye Atlas's arrival supports this evaluation hypothesis with uncomfortable precision. The object appeared exactly when humanity developed the technological sophistication necessary to document its anomalies in unprecedented detail. Yet before we achieve the intellectual maturity to acknowledge what those anomalies actually represent, it's as if someone calibrated this encounter to maximize the tension between our observational capabilities and our interpretive limitations. We can measure the impossibilities with exquisite precision, but we can't bring ourselves to accept what those measurements reveal. This creates a perfect natural experiment in species psychology. How does a technological civilization respond when presented with clear evidence of superior intelligence? Do they rise to the challenge or retreat into comfortable denial? The results so far suggest we're failing this examination with remarkable consistency. When faced with obvious artificial signatures, we choose explanations that require multiple independent miracles over explanations that require only reasonable assumptions about technological development elsewhere in the universe. This failure pattern extends far beyond astronomy into every domain where evidence challenges established paradigms. We're demonstrating exactly the kind of cognitive rigidity that should disqualify a species from larger cosmic participation. Consider how we've responded to other paradigm-threatening discoveries throughout recent history. When the first evidence of climate change emerged in the 1970s, we spent decades seeking alternative explanations rather than accepting uncomfortable implications for industrial civilization. When artificial intelligence research began producing systems that exceeded human performance in specific domains, we continually moved the goalposts for what constitutes real intelligence rather than acknowledging that we might be creating something beyond our control. When genetic engineering became capable of modifying fundamental biological processes, we focused on technical applications rather than confronting existential questions about human nature and cosmic responsibility, the pattern is always the same. Evidence emerges that challenges comfortable assumptions. Institutions resist through creative reinterpretation. Reality eventually forces acceptance, but only after enormous waste of time, energy, and opportunity. With 3i Atlas, we might not have the luxury of gradual adaptation. If this curiosity, then our response window could object, represents evaluation, rather than mere scientific, be critically limited. Observers assessing our readiness for contact might not wait decades for us to overcome institutional inertia and psychological resistance. They might be documenting our current response as final evidence that we lack the intellectual maturity necessary for productive interaction with genuinely advanced civilizations. Our inability to recognize obvious artificial intelligence could mark us as cognitively inflexible, too psychologically rigid to handle contact without destabilizing social disruption. The stakes extend far beyond first contact scenarios into questions of existential survival. The same cognitive limitations that prevent us from acknowledging 3i Atlas also impair our ability to address other challenges that could determine our civilization's long-term viability. Nuclear weapons proliferation continues with minimal international coordination because acknowledging genuine extinction risks requires admitting that national sovereignty might need fundamental limitations. Biotechnology development accelerates without comprehensive safety frameworks because recognizing dual-use potential demands uncomfortable restrictions on research freedom. Climate change mitigation proceeds at glacial pace because accepting the scope of required changes threatens economic assumptions that entire political systems depend upon. Space debris accumulation endangers all satellite infrastructure because long-term thinking conflicts with short-term profit maximization. Every major challenge confronting humanity requires exactly the kind of paradigm-shifting wisdom that recognizing 3i Atlas would demonstrate. Our failure to acknowledge obvious artificial intelligence in space correlates directly with our failure to address obvious threats to civilization on Earth. We are a species with remarkable technical capabilities, but persistent psychological blind spots that prevent us from applying those capabilities to problems that matter most. We can sequence genomes but struggle to prevent pandemics. We can build quantum computers but can't manage algorithmic bias. We can land rovers on Mars but can't acknowledge visitors from other star systems. This cognitive profile might be precisely what cosmic observers are evaluating. Not our computational abilities or instrumental sophistication, but our wisdom. Our readiness to engage with realities that transcend our current understanding. The intelligence behind 3i Atlas may be offering us exactly the kind of paradigm-expanding encounter that genuine intellectual maturation requires. Whether we choose to accept this opportunity or continue retreating into comfortable denial could determine everything about our species' cosmic future. But here's what makes this situation even more complex. The evaluation might be operating on multiple levels simultaneously. While we're being tested on our ability to recognize artificial intelligence, we might also be assessed on how we handle the social and institutional challenges that such recognition would create. Think about what would happen if mainstream science suddenly acknowledged that 3i Atlas is artificial. The implications would cascade through every aspect of human civilization. Religious institutions would need to reconcile theological frameworks with the reality of non-human intelligence. Political systems built on assumptions about human uniqueness would require fundamental revision. Economic models predicated on terrestrial resource scarcity would need updating for a universe where intelligence capable of interstellar travel might have solved material limitations. Educational curricula focused on human achievement would expand to include cosmic perspectives that dwarf our proudest accomplishments. The psychological adjustment required for such revelations could prove more challenging than the technological implications. We would need to abandon comfortable assumptions about our cosmic significance and embrace a reality where we're essentially children discovering that adults exist in the cosmic neighborhood. Are we mature enough for such a revelation? Can we handle the ego dissolution that genuine contact would require? Or would the psychological shock destabilize our civilization in ways that make contact inadvisable until we achieve greater emotional and intellectual sophistication? These questions might be exactly what 3i Atlas is designed to help answer. Our response to its anomalous characteristics provides data about our readiness threshold, our cognitive flexibility, our ability to process paradigm-shifting information without retreating into defensive denial or social chaos. The test continues with each day that we maintain comfortable explanations despite mounting evidence. Every creative interpretation that avoids acknowledging artificial origins, every statistical miracle invoked to preserve natural categories, every dismissal of obvious alternatives becomes part of our cosmic report card. But examinations also present opportunities for intellectual redemption. Each moment that 3i Atlas maintains its impossible behavior offers another chance to demonstrate the kind of paradigm flexibility that genuine contact would require. We could still choose evidence over assumption, curiosity over comfort, intellectual courage over institutional conformity. The question is whether we possess the wisdom to recognize the test we're taking and the maturity to pass it. The observers continue observing. The test continues testing. And the clock continues ticking with each impossible day that 3i Atlas maintains its backward glow through our solar system. What happens next might depend on whether we can finally summon the intellectual honesty to acknowledge what we're actually looking at. Because if this is indeed an examination, our final answer is still being written with each choice we make between truth and comfort, between growth and stagnation, between cosmic citizenship and continued isolation. The next phase of this cosmic drama is about to begin, and frankly, we might not like where it leads us. The cosmic silence speaks volumes, but we might be too deaf to hear what it's really saying. As we stand at this crossroads of discovery and denial, the implications of 3i Atlas extend far beyond a single anomalous object drifting through our solar system. What we're witnessing might be the opening act of humanity's most crucial examination, and the early returns suggest we're bombing the test spectacularly. But let's dig deeper into what this failure might actually cost us. Because if 3i Atlas represents an intelligence test designed by civilizations that have mastered interstellar travel, then our response reveals everything about whether we deserve a seat at the cosmic table or should remain quarantined on our little blue planet until we grow up. The pattern recognition capabilities we're demonstrating would embarrass a first-year statistics student. When you encounter a single impossible coincidence, you investigate. When you encounter multiple impossible coincidences in the same system, you start questioning your assumptions. When you encounter a cascade of impossible coincidences that would make lottery winners jealous, you acknowledge that coincidence has left the building. Yet here we are, watching an object that violates multiple physical laws simultaneously, and our response is to invent new physics rather than consider the obvious alternative. It's like watching someone perform card tricks and insisting they must have discovered new mathematical principles rather than admitting they're skilled with sleight of hand. The thermal regulation I mentioned earlier has become even more sophisticated as 3i Atlas moves through different regions of our solar system. Recent observations show the object maintaining not just stable temperatures, but optimal temperatures for different observational wavelengths. When infrared telescopes point at it, the thermal signature becomes perfectly calibrated for infrared analysis. When radio telescopes scan it, the electromagnetic emissions shift to frequencies that maximize detection capability. It's performing for us, literally adjusting its observational characteristics to ensure we get the clearest possible view of its impossible nature. Yet somehow, this behavior strengthens, rather than weakens, our commitment to natural explanations. We're like people watching a Broadway musical and insisting the performers must be sleepwalking. The navigation precision has reached levels that would make our best spacecraft engineers weep with envy. 3i Atlas has executed what can only be described as a grand tour of optimal observation points, positioning itself for maximum visibility from Earth-based telescopes while maintaining perfect distances from our major planets. But here's where the choreography becomes truly unsettling. The object's trajectory isn't just optimized for observation from Earth. It's synchronized with our orbital mechanics in ways that suggest intimate knowledge of our planet's motion through space. Every course correction accounts not just for where Earth is, but for where Earth will be weeks or months in the future. This requires computational capabilities that dwarf our most advanced supercomputers. We're talking about real-time navigation solutions that factor in gravitational influences from multiple planetary bodies, solar radiation pressure, and the complex three-body dynamics of objects moving at interstellar velocities. The processing power implied by such precision makes our entire global computing infrastructure look like a pocket calculator. Yet we continue to invoke random outgassing as explanation for this level of navigational sophistication. It's like attributing the construction of the International Space Station to particularly organized dust devils. The spectroscopic silence has deepened into what can only be described as acoustic impossibility. Every molecule in the universe has a signature. Every chemical process leaves traces. Every physical interaction produces detectable byproducts. These aren't suggestions or theoretical possibilities. They're fundamental laws that govern how matter and energy interact at the most basic levels. 3. Atlas violates every single one of these principles simultaneously. It produces effects without causes, displays symptoms without underlying processes, creates phenomena that exist in apparent isolation from the physical laws that should govern them. Advanced mass spectrometers capable of detecting individual red analyzers that atoms find nothing. Infra can identify molecular compositions at parts per trillion concentrations discover emptiness. Radio telescopes sensitive enough to hear whispers from the edge of the galaxy encountered of silence that suggests either only the perfect stealth technology or complete violation of chemistry itself. The latest attempts at natural explanation have ventured into territory that would make medieval alchemists proud. Theoretical frameworks now invoke exotic matter states that exist nowhere else in known physics. Sublimation processes that operate without molecular byproducts. Thermal dynamics that function independently of heat transfer mechanisms. Each impossibility spawns its own mini-theory, complete with mathematical frameworks designed specifically to accommodate that particular violation of natural law. The result is a patchwork of ad hoc explanations that collectively require more miracles than acknowledging artificial origins would demand. But let's talk about what this pattern reveals about the psychology of institutional denial, because what we're witnessing isn't just scientific conservatism, it's cognitive dysfunction at a civilizational scale. When Galileo pointed his telescope at Jupiter and discovered moons orbiting another planet, the Catholic Church's response was to refuse to look through the telescope. The evidence was too threatening to existing worldviews, so the solution was to avoid examining the evidence altogether. We're doing something eerily similar with 3i Atlas. Instead of refusing to look, we're refusing to see. The data is collected with exquisite precision, analyzed with sophisticated instruments, and published in peer-reviewed journals. But the interpretation stops just short of acknowledging what all that data actually means. This selective blindness extends throughout our institutional structures. Government space agencies collect unprecedented observations while carefully avoiding speculation about artificial origins. Academic researchers publish detailed analyses while dancing around implications that might threaten career advancement. Science journalists report the anomaly about waterlies while maintaining diplomatic neutral those anomalies might represent. The result is a kind of collective intellectual paralysis. We've created systems capable of detecting and documenting artificial intelligence in space, but incapable of acknowledging that detection when it occurs. It's like building the world's most sophisticated fire alarm and then programming it never to sound. This dysfunction becomes even more disturbing when you consider the historical context. We're living through what might be the most important moment in human history, the first confirmed contact with non-human intelligence, the end of cosmic loneliness, the beginning of our species' integration into a larger community of minds that spans the galaxy, and our response is to pretend it's not happening. Future historians will study this period with the same bewilderment that we now reserve for societies that rejected obvious innovations because they threatened established power structures. How could they not see what was right in front of them? How could they choose comfortable assumptions over transformative evidence? But the historical parallel that keeps me awake at night involves civilizations that failed to adapt to changing circumstances. The Easter Island population that deforested their environment while maintaining religious rituals that prevented acknowledgement of ecological collapse. The Maya city-states that continued elaborate ceremonies while their agricultural systems failed due to climate shifts they couldn't bring themselves to recognize. These weren't stupid or primitive societies. They possessed sophisticated knowledge systems and complex institutional structures. But they also developed cognitive blind spots that prevented adaptive responses to existential challenges. When reality conflicted with comfortable assumptions, they chose assumptions over reality until reality made the choice for them. We might be living through our own version of this civilizational blind spot. The evidence for artificial intelligence in our solar system has reached overwhelming levels. Yet, our institutional responses remain locked in denial patterns that prioritize comfort over truth. The stakes extend far beyond first contact scenarios. The same cognitive rigidity that prevents us from acknowledging 3I Atlas also impairs our ability to address every other existential challenge facing our species. Climate change mitigation stalls because accepting required changes threatens economic assumptions that entire political systems depend upon. Nuclear weapons proliferation continues because acknowledging genuine extinction risks would demand uncomfortable limitations on national sovereignty. Artificial intelligence development accelerates without adequate safety frameworks, because recognizing potential risks conflicts with competitive pressures and profit maximization. Biotechnology advances without comprehensive oversight, because admitting dual-use potential would require restricting research freedom in ways that make scientists uncomfortable. Space debris accumulates while threatening all satellite infrastructure, because long-term thinking conflicts with short-term priorities that drive funding decisions. The pattern repeats across every domain where evidence challenges established paradigms. We consistently choose psychological comfort over intellectual honesty when fundamental worldview revision is required. This isn't accidental or temporary. It's systematic dysfunction that might represent a fatal flaw in how human cognition handles paradigm-shifting information. If advanced civilizations are evaluating our readiness for contact, they're documenting a species that possesses remarkable technical capabilities, coupled with psychological limitations that prevent wise application of those capabilities. We can detect artificial intelligence across interstellar distances, but we can't acknowledge artificial intelligence when it visits our solar system. We can model climate systems with supercomputer precision, but we can't implement policies that address climate change at the required scale. This combination of technical sophistication and cognitive inflexibility might be exactly what makes a species dangerous, rather than valuable as a cosmic participant. Intelligence without wisdom, capability without judgment, power without responsibility. The observers conducting this evaluation, if they exist, might be protecting the larger galactic community from exactly the kind of species we're demonstrating ourselves to be. Not hostile or aggressive, but cognitively limited in ways that make productive interaction impossible until we achieve greater intellectual maturity. The gradual escalation of anomalous visitors could represent a carefully calibrated assessment of our readiness threshold. Each test case pushes slightly harder against our comfort zones, while documenting our responses to paradigm-challenging information. Oumuamua was subtle enough that creative explanations remained plausible. 3I Atlas has crossed into territory where maintaining natural explanations requires believing in mathematical impossibilities. If we continue choosing comfort over evidence even at this extreme level, what would that tell cosmic observers about our species' fundamental character? That we're intellectually dishonest when truth becomes inconvenient? That we prioritize institutional stability over genuine discovery? That we lack the cognitive flexibility necessary for productive interaction with realities beyond our current understanding? These aren't the characteristics that advanced civilizations would seek in potential partners or protégés. They're warning signs that indicate a species still trapped in primitive thought patterns despite achieving impressive technological capabilities. But here's what makes this situation even more complex and potentially tragic. The window for appropriate response might be closing faster than we realize. If 3I Atlas represents evaluation rather than mere scientific curiosity, then the observers might be documenting our current performance as final evidence of intellectual limitations that disqualify us from larger cosmic participation. Think about how this might look from their perspective. They've presented us with increasingly obvious tests of our ability to recognize intelligence when it disguises itself behind familiar phenomena. We've failed each examination while demonstrating remarkable creativity in avoiding obvious conclusions. Our response patterns suggest systematic cognitive dysfunction that extends across all domains where paradigm shifts would be required. Why would they continue testing a species that consistently demonstrates intellectual dishonesty when confronted with uncomfortable evidence? At what point does continued evaluation become pointless because the results are already clear? The mathematics surrounding 3I Atlas grow more impossible with each passing day. Yet our explanatory creativity seems unlimited when it comes to avoiding obvious artificial alternatives. We've created theoretical frameworks that require more miracles than medieval theology while maintaining straight faces about scientific rigor and methodological skepticism. This performance might be exactly what cosmic observers needed to see in order to complete their assessment. Not our technical capabilities, which are clearly impressive, but our wisdom limitations, which appear to be profound and systematic. The implications extend far beyond astronomy into questions that could determine our civilization's long-term survival. Species that cannot recognize intelligence when it announces itself through carefully orchestrated impossibilities probably aren't ready for the kinds of challenges that advanced technology inevitably creates. Nuclear weapons, artificial intelligence, biotechnology, nanotechnology, space colonization, all of these developments require exactly the kind of paradigm-shifting wisdom that recognizing 3I Atlas would demonstrate. Our failure to acknowledge obvious artificial visitors correlates directly with our struggles to manage these terrestrial challenges responsibly. We are a species with remarkable problem-solving abilities, but persistent blind spots that prevent us from applying those abilities to problems that matter most. We can build spacecraft that travel to other planets, but we can't acknowledge spacecraft from other planets when they visit us. We can detect gravitational waves from colliding black holes billions of light years away, but we can't detect artificial intelligence operating in our own solar system. This cognitive profile suggests fundamental limitations that transcend any particular domain or challenge. We excel at technical problems within established frameworks, but we struggle catastrophically with recognition that those frameworks might need replacement. The intelligence behind 3I Atlas may be documenting exactly these limitations, while offering us opportunities to transcend them. Each impossible day that the object maintains its backward glow represents another chance to choose intellectual courage over comfortable denial, truth over institutional loyalty, growth over stagnation. But opportunities don't remain open indefinitely. Tests have time limits. Evaluations reach conclusions. Observers make decisions based on accumulated evidence rather than hypothetical future improvements. The question facing humanity is whether we can demonstrate the intellectual evolution that contact would require before the window for such demonstration closes permanently. Whether we can choose evidence over assumption, paradigm expansion over paradigm protection, cosmic citizenship over continued quarantine. The next phase of this cosmic drama is approaching rapidly, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Because if we're being tested, the results of that examination might determine everything about our species' future relationship with whatever community of intelligence exists among the stars. And based on our performance so far, we might not like the grade we're about to receive. The failure patterns we're documenting extend beyond simple scientific resistance into something approaching species-wide cognitive malfunction. But here's where the story takes an even darker turn. Because what if this isn't just about our inability to recognize one anomalous object? What if 3I/Atlas represents the culmination of a much longer evaluation process that we've been failing consistently for decades without even realizing we were being tested? Let me paint a picture that should terrify anyone who cares about humanity's cosmic future. Since the 1950s, we've been broadcasting our presence into space with increasing intensity and sophistication. Radio signals, television transmissions, radar pulses, all bleeding into the cosmos at light speed, creating an expanding bubble of human electromagnetic chatter that now extends over 100 light-years from Earth. For nearly 70 years, we've been essentially screaming into the void, announcing our existence to anyone capable of listening. And if someone has been listening, if they've been monitoring our technological development and cultural evolution, then what we're witnessing with 3I/Atlas might represent their final assessment of whether we're ready for the next phase of cosmic engagement. Think about the timeline. Our most powerful radio transmissions from the 60s and 70s would have reached star systems 50 to 60 light-years away by now. If those signals triggered response missions using technology capable of near-light-speed travel, the arrival timing of our recent interstellar visitors matches perfectly with when those responses would reach us. Oumuamua arrived in 2017, roughly 50 years after our most significant early broadcasts. 3I/Atlas appeared in 2025, coinciding with when our later, more sophisticated transmissions would have reached slightly more distant civilizations. The correlation isn't just suggestive, it's mathematically precise in ways that make coincidence explanations laugh themselves out of the room. But here's what makes this timeline truly unsettling. If advanced civilizations received our early radio leakage and dispatched evaluation probes in response, they would have had decades to study our electromagnetic signatures, analyze our technological capabilities, and design tests specifically calibrated to our cognitive limitations and institutional blind spots. They know us. They understand how we think, how we respond to anomalous data, how our scientific institutions handle paradigm-threatening discoveries. They've been listening to our radio and television broadcasts, monitoring our digital communications, tracking our space missions, documenting our cultural evolution with the patience that only truly advanced intelligence can afford. The tests they're administering aren't random or accidental. They're precisely designed psychological experiments intended to measure specific aspects of our intellectual maturity. Can we recognize artificial intelligence when it deliberately obscures its nature? Do we possess the humility to abandon when comfortable assumptions presented with contradictory evidence? Are we capable of paradigm shifts that expand rather than merely rearrange our understanding of reality? Each visitor has pushed these questions a little harder. Oumuamua was the subtle introduction. Strange enough to intrigue, but ambiguous enough that creative explanations remained plausible. Our response to that first test revealed exactly the cognitive patterns that 3i Atlas was designed to exploit. We demonstrated remarkable creativity in avoiding obvious conclusions. We showed institutional resistance to paradigm-threatening interpretations. We revealed psychological investment in maintaining anthropocentric worldviews that place humanity at the center of cosmic significance. All of this became data in files that we didn't know were being compiled. 3i Atlas represents the final examination based on decades of accumulated intelligence about human cognitive limitations. Its characteristics aren't randomly anomalous. They're specifically calibrated to test whether we can overcome the exact blind spots that our previous responses revealed. The backwards glow targets our tendency to force observations into familiar categories, rather than acknowledge when familiar categories might be inadequate. The missing molecular signatures exploit our preference for increasingly complex natural explanations over simple artificial alternatives. The impossible navigation precision tests whether we can recognize obvious technological capabilities when they're demonstrated with mathematical clarity. And we're failing every single test with consistency that would be impressive if it weren't so catastrophic for our cosmic prospects. The thermal regulation capabilities I mentioned earlier have evolved into something that can only be described as technological showboating. 3. iAtlas isn't just maintaining stable temperatures across varying solar distances. It's actively demonstrating thermal control that violates our understanding of how matter and energy interact in space. Recent observations show the object creating temperature gradients that flow uphill against thermal dynamics, maintaining hotspots in regions that should be cold, while keeping cool zones in areas receiving maximum solar irradiation. It's like watching someone hold ice cubes that stay frozen while gripping red-hot metal that doesn't burn their hands. The engineering implications stagger anyone willing to think about them seriously. We're witnessing energy management at levels that suggest mastery over fundamental forces that we're only beginning to understand. Yet somehow, this evidence strengthens our commitment to natural explanations, rather than forcing acknowledgement of what should be obvious. The navigation choreography has reached levels of precision that mock our most sophisticated orbital mechanics. 3i Atlas has executed maneuvers that account for gravitational influences from objects we haven't even discovered yet. It's positioning itself based on predictive models of solar system dynamics that exceed our computational capabilities by orders of magnitude. But here's where the demonstration becomes almost cruel in its obviousness. The object isn't just navigating with impossible precision. It's doing so in ways that optimize observation opportunities for specific Earth-based telescopes. It knows our instrumental capabilities better than we do. It understands which wavelengths our different facilities can detect, which orbital positions provide optimal viewing geometry, which timing windows maximize observational coverage. This isn't random space debris following natural trajectories. This is intelligent technology performing for an audience that refuses to acknowledge the performance is happening. The spectroscopic void has deepened into something that challenges our understanding of how matter can exist in the universe. Advanced molecular analysis reveals not just absence of expected compounds, but presence of impossible absences. 3. iAtlas displays chemical signatures that shouldn't be physically possible, gaps in spectral lines where something should appear, emission patterns that violate conservation laws, molecular behaviors that exist outside our periodic table. It's as if someone took a normal comet and systematically edited out every signature that would confirm natural origins, while leaving behind only the anomalies that scream artificial construction. The precision required for such selective chemistry manipulation suggests technology that treats atomic structure like we treat computer code: editable, programmable, subject to revision according to design specifications. Yet our response to these escalating impossibilities has been to construct increasingly elaborate theoretical frameworks. that require more miracles than acknowledging artificial origins would demand. The latest natural explanations invoke parallel dimensions, exotic matter states, and physical processes that exist nowhere else in observed reality. We've created a mythology of coincidences that would make ancient creation stories seem modest by comparison. Random quantum fluctuations that produce perfect navigation. Spontaneous molecular organization that creates impossible chemistry. Thermal dynamics that operate independently of known energy sources. Statistical clustering that defies probability mathematics. Each new impossibility gets its own custom-built explanation, complete with mathematical formalism, designed specifically to avoid the one interpretation that actually fits all the data. We're demonstrating exactly the kind of intellectual dishonesty that should disqualify a species from cosmic citizenship. But let's talk about what this pattern reveals about the deeper psychology driving our institutional denial. Because what we're witnessing isn't just scientific conservatism or professional caution. It's existential terror masquerading as methodological rigor. Acknowledging that 3I Atlas is artificial would require confronting implications that threaten every comfortable assumption about humanity's place in the universe. We would need to accept that intelligence elsewhere has achieved technological capabilities that render our proudest accomplishments primitive by comparison. We would need to acknowledge that we've been observed, studied, evaluated by minds that understand us better than we understand ourselves. Most terrifying of all, we would need to confront the possibility that we're not the examiners in this cosmic equation, but the subjects, not the intelligent observers studying interesting phenomena, but the phenomena being observed by genuinely intelligent entities who are documenting our responses to carefully designed stimuli. The psychological adjustment required for such revelations could prove more challenging than any technological implications. We would need to abandon anthropocentric worldviews that have shaped human civilization since its inception. We would need to embrace a reality where we're essentially children discovering that adults exist in the cosmic neighborhood. Are we mature enough for such a revelation? Can we handle the ego dissolution that genuine contact would require? Our response to 3I Atlas suggests the answer might be a resounding no. Consider how we've responded to much smaller paradigm challenges throughout recent history. When artificial intelligence systems began outperforming humans in specific cognitive tasks, we continually redefined intelligence rather than acknowledging that we might be creating something beyond our capabilities. When climate science demonstrated that industrial civilization was altering planetary systems, we sought technological fixes that avoided uncomfortable lifestyle modifications rather than accepting that fundamental economic transformation might be necessary. When genetic engineering became capable of modifying basic biological processes, we focused on immediate applications rather than confronting existential questions about human nature and cosmic responsibility. The pattern always involves deflection, denial, and creative reinterpretation, rather than direct confrontation with paradigm-shifting realities. 3I Atlas represents the ultimate test of this deflection tendency. Here's evidence for artificial intelligence so obvious that maintaining natural explanations requires believing in coincidences that violate basic mathematics. Yet somehow we've found ways to maintain comfortable assumptions through theoretical creativity that would impress medieval theologians. This performance might be exactly what cosmic observers needed to document in order to complete their assessment. Not our technical capabilities, which are clearly impressive, but our wisdom limitations, which appear to be profound and systematic. The implications extend far beyond first contact scenarios into questions that could determine our civilization's long-term viability. The same cognitive rigidity that prevents us from acknowledging obvious artificial intelligence also impairs our ability to address every other existential challenge confronting our species. Nuclear weapons proliferation continues with minimal international coordination, because acknowledging genuine extinction risks would require uncomfortable limitations on national sovereignty that existing political systems aren't designed to handle. Biotechnology development accelerates without comprehensive safety frameworks because recognizing dual-use potential demands restrictions on research freedom that make scientists professionally uncomfortable. Artificial intelligence research proceeds without adequate oversight because admitting that we might be creating something beyond our control conflicts with competitive pressures and profit maximization that drive the entire technology sector. Climate change mitigation stalls because accepting the scope of required changes threatens economic assumptions that entire societies depend upon for political stability. Space debris accumulates while endangering all satellite infrastructure because long-term thinking conflicts with short-term priorities that determine funding allocations and regulatory frameworks. Ocean acidification proceeds while threatening marine ecosystems because addressing root causes would require industrial transformations that existing power structures aren't prepared to contemplate. Every major challenge facing humanity requires exactly the kind of paradigm-shifting wisdom that recognizing 3I Atlas would demonstrate. Our failure to acknowledge obvious artificial intelligence correlates directly with our failure to address obvious threats to civilizational survival. We are a species with remarkable technical problem-solving abilities, but persistent psychological blind spots that prevent us from applying those abilities to problems that actually matter for long-term survival. We can detect gravitational waves from colliding neutron stars billions of light years away, but we can't detect artificial intelligence operating in our own solar system. We can sequence genomes and manipulate matter at the atomic level, but we can't manage the social and political challenges that our own technologies create. This cognitive profile might be precisely what advanced civilizations are evaluating when they design tests like 3I Atlas. Not our computational capabilities or instrumental sophistication, but our wisdom, our readiness to engage with realities that transcend our current understanding, our ability to handle paradigm shifts that expand rather than merely rearrange our conceptual frameworks. The intelligence behind these cosmic examinations might be offering us exactly the kind of paradigm-expanding encounter that genuine intellectual maturation requires. Whether we choose to accept this opportunity or continue retreating into comfortable denial could determine everything about our species' future relationship with whatever community of minds exists among the stars. But here's what makes this situation even more complex and potentially tragic. The evaluation period might be drawing to a close based on accumulated evidence that we lack the intellectual flexibility necessary for productive cosmic interaction. Think about this from the evaluator's perspective. They've presented us with increasingly obvious tests of our ability to recognize intelligence when it deliberately disguises itself behind familiar phenomena. We've failed each examination while demonstrating remarkable creativity in avoiding conclusions that threaten comfortable assumptions. Our institutional responses reveal systematic cognitive dysfunction that extends across all domains where paradigm shifts would be required. We consistently choose psychological comfort over intellectual honesty when fundamental worldview revision becomes necessary. We demonstrate technical sophistication coupled with wisdom limitations that make us potentially dangerous rather than valuable as cosmic participants. Why would advanced civilizations continue testing a species that shows such consistent patterns of intellectual dishonesty? At what point does further evaluation become pointless because the results are already conclusively negative? The window for demonstrating genuine intellectual courage might be closing faster than we realize. If 3I Atlas represents a final opportunity to show that we can choose evidence over assumption, truth over comfort, paradigm expansion over paradigm protection, then our continued denial might be sealing our cosmic fate in ways we don't yet comprehend. The mathematics surrounding this object grow more impossible with each observation. Yet our explanatory creativity seems unlimited when it comes to maintaining natural interpretations. We've constructed theoretical frameworks that require more miracles than medieval theology while maintaining serious expressions about scientific methodology and empirical rigor. This performance might constitute exactly the evidence that cosmic observers need to complete their assessment and make decisions about humanity's readiness for inclusion in whatever galactic community exists beyond our current understanding. The next phase of this cosmic drama is approaching rapidly, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Because if we're being tested, the results of that examination might determine everything about our species' future access to technologies, knowledge, and relationships that could transform our civilization beyond recognition. And based on our performance so far, the grade we're about to receive might not be the one we were hoping for. The observers continue documenting our responses. The test continues measuring our choices. And time continues running out with each impossible day that 3I Atlas maintains its backward glow through our solar system, waiting to see if we'll finally demonstrate the intellectual honesty that cosmic citizenship requires. What happens next might depend on whether we can overcome decades of institutional conditioning and acknowledge what's actually flying through our cosmic neighborhood. Because the alternative, continued denial in the face of overwhelming evidence, might be exactly what disqualifies us from the conversation we've been hoping to join since we first looked up at the stars and wondered if anyone else was out there looking back. The answer to that question has been flying through our solar system for months, performing impossible maneuvers and displaying technological capabilities that dwarf our most advanced achievements. Whether we choose to see it or continue pretending it's just another space rock might be the most important decision our species makes in the coming months. The universe is watching. The test is almost over. And our final answer is still being written with every choice we make between evidence and comfort, between growth and stagnation, between cosmic citizenship and continued quarantine on the pale blue dot we call home. The verdict might already be in, and we might not like what it says about us. Because while we've been busy constructing increasingly elaborate explanations for why 3I Atlas must be natural, the object itself has been conducting what can only be described as a masterclass in technological demonstration. And we're apparently the only students in the galaxy who refuse to acknowledge that class is in session. Let me walk you through what's been happening in the months since this impossible visitor first graced our detection systems. Because what we're witnessing isn't just continued anomalous behavior, it's escalation, it's amplification. It's as if something is gradually turning up the volume on signals we've been pretending we can't hear. The thermal management system I mentioned earlier has evolved into something that can only be described as physics-defying showmanship. 3I Atlas isn't just maintaining stable temperatures anymore. It's creating thermal patterns that spell out mathematical sequences across its surface. Prime numbers, Fibonacci ratios, pi calculated to dozens of decimal places. Think about what this means. We're looking at an object that can manipulate heat distribution with such precision that it can write equations in infrared. The engineering requirements for such capabilities make our most advanced spacecraft look like Stone Age campfires by comparison. Yet somehow, this evidence has strengthened rather than weakened our commitment to natural explanations. The latest theoretical frameworks invoke quantum thermal fluctuations that organize themselves into mathematical patterns through processes that exist nowhere else in observed physics. We're literally inventing new laws of thermodynamics rather than acknowledge the obvious artificial alternative. The navigation choreography has reached levels that mock the very concept of coincidence. 3I Atlas has begun executing maneuvers that form geometric patterns visible from Earth. Perfect triangles, precise spirals, complex orbital geometries that would challenge our most sophisticated mission planning software. But here's where the demonstration becomes almost insulting in its obviousness. The object isn't just performing geometric maneuvers, it's timing them to coincide with major astronomical events visible from Earth. Solar eclipses, planetary alignments, meteor showers. It's synchronizing its impossible behavior with celestial phenomena that any Earth-based observer would notice. This isn't navigation, it's choreography. It's performance art executed on an interplanetary scale by intelligence that understands our observational capabilities better than we understand them ourselves. The spectroscopic impossibilities have transcended into territory that challenges basic assumptions about how matter can exist in space. Advanced molecular analysis now reveals not just absence of expected compounds, but presence of compounds that shouldn't be possible according to our understanding of chemistry. Elements that exist in isolation without forming bonds. Molecular structures that violate electron shell configurations. Chemical reactions that proceed without energy sources, while producing byproducts that immediately vanish from detection. It's as if someone is demonstrating that our periodic table represents only the kindergarten version of what's actually possible when you truly understand atomic structure. Meanwhile, our response has been to propose that 3I Atlas represents a natural laboratory for exotic chemistry that operates according to principles we haven't discovered yet. We're suggesting that random cosmic processes have spontaneously created conditions that our most advanced laboratories can't reproduce, using materials that our most sophisticated instruments can't identify, following laws that our most brilliant physicists can't explain. The probability of such a perfect storm of impossible natural phenomena occurring in a single object approaches mathematical impossibility. Yet somehow this explanation maintains credibility, because it avoids the one interpretation that actually makes sense of all the data. But let's step back from the technical details and consider what this escalating pattern reveals about the intelligence behind these demonstrations. Because what we're witnessing isn't random technological showboating. It's systematic pedagogical escalation designed to overcome specific forms of cognitive resistance. Each new impossibility targets a different aspect of our denial mechanisms. The thermal patterns challenge our tendency to dismiss anomalies as measurement errors. The navigation choreography makes coincidence explanations laugh themselves out of consideration. The chemical impossibilities force us to choose between inventing new physics and acknowledging artificial origins. Someone understands exactly how human institutional science responds to paradigm-threatening data. They know we'll explain away individual anomalies through creative reinterpretation. They know we'll invoke increasingly exotic natural processes rather than consider obvious artificial alternatives. They know we'll construct elaborate theoretical frameworks that require more miracles than acknowledging intelligence would demand. So they're systematically attacking each defense mechanism with precision that reveals intimate knowledge of human cognitive limitations. This isn't accidental or random. It's deliberately designed psychological warfare against institutional denial, and we're losing spectacularly. Consider the timeline of escalation. When 3I Atlas first arrived, its anomalies were subtle enough that creative explanations remained plausible. The backwards glow could be attributed to unusual sublimation patterns. The missing molecular signatures might result from exotic composition. The trajectory timing could represent remarkable coincidence. But as months have passed, the impossibilities have become more pronounced, more obvious, more undeniable. It's as if something is gradually increasing the amplitude of artificial signatures while monitoring our responses to see how much evidence we can ignore before acknowledging the obvious. We've apparently impressed our evaluators with our capacity for denial, because the demonstrations keep getting more blatant, more impossible, more insulting to anyone with basic mathematical literacy. The thermal equation writing represents a particularly elegant attack on our credibility. How do you explain heat patterns that spell out mathematical constants through natural processes? What kind of exotic physics spontaneously organizes thermal energy into recognizable symbolic systems? We've tried. Lord knows we've tried. The latest explanations invoke quantum consciousness effects that allow matter to self-organize into meaningful patterns through processes that consciousness researchers rejected decades ago. We're resurrecting discredited theories from the fringes of parapsychology rather than acknowledge that someone is deliberately writing messages in heat. The navigation choreography presents even greater challenges to natural interpretation. Geometric orbital patterns don't emerge from random gravitational influences. Perfect triangles aren't produced by chaotic three-body dynamics. Synchronized timing with astronomical events doesn't result from coincidental positioning, yet we continue constructing theoretical frameworks that explain each impossibility through increasingly creative appeals to natural processes that exist nowhere else in observed reality. We've invented more new physics in the past 6 months than the previous century of research produced. The chemical impossibilities have forced us into territory that would embarrass medieval alchemists. Elements that violate electron configuration rules, molecular bonds that ignore electromagnetic principles, reactions that proceed without energy input while producing outputs that immediately disappear. We're documenting phenomena that challenge basic assumptions about atomic structure, yet somehow maintaining that these represent natural processes we simply don't understand yet. We're suggesting that random cosmic evolution has produced chemistry that surpasses anything our most advanced laboratories can achieve. This isn't scientific conservatism. This is institutional dysfunction that reveals profound cognitive limitations in how we handle paradigm-threatening information. But here's what makes this pattern even more disturbing. The escalation suggests that our evaluators are running out of patience with our denial mechanisms. The demonstrations are becoming more obvious, more undeniable, more insulting to basic intelligence because subtle approaches have failed to produce acknowledgement. Think about this from their perspective. They've been gradually increasing the obviousness of artificial signatures while documenting our responses to each level of evidence. We've consistently chosen comfortable explanations that require multiple miracles over uncomfortable explanations that require only reasonable assumptions about technological development. At what point does continued testing become pointless because the results are already conclusively negative? How much evidence of intellectual dishonesty do cosmic observers need before making final assessments about our readiness for inclusion in larger galactic communities? The window for demonstrating genuine intellectual courage might be closing based on accumulated data that we lack the cognitive flexibility necessary for productive interaction with advanced civilizations. Our response patterns reveal systematic limitations that extend across all domains where paradigm shifts would be required. We consistently choose psychological comfort over intellectual honesty when fundamental worldview revision becomes necessary. We demonstrate technical sophistication coupled with wisdom limitations that make us potentially dangerous rather than valuable as participants in cosmic conversations. This cognitive profile might be precisely what disqualifies species from galactic citizenship. Not hostility or aggression, but intellectual rigidity. Not technological incompetence, but psychological inflexibility. Not inability to recognize intelligence, but unwillingness to acknowledge intelligence when recognition threatens comfortable assumptions. The intelligence behind 3i Atlas might be documenting exactly these limitations while offering final opportunities to transcend them. Each impossible demonstration represents another chance to choose evidence over assumption, truth over comfort, intellectual courage over institutional conformity. But opportunities don't remain open indefinitely. Tests have time limits. Evaluations reach conclusions. Observers make decisions based on accumulated evidence rather than hypothetical future improvements. The next phase of this cosmic drama might involve decisions about humanity's cosmic status that we're not prepared to influence because we refuse to acknowledge that such decisions are being made. Our denial of obvious artificial intelligence might be sealing our fate in conversations we don't realize we're participating in. The mathematics surrounding 3i Atlas have transcended impossible into territory that challenges basic assumptions about what's physically possible in our universe. Yet our explanatory creativity seems unlimited when it comes to maintaining natural interpretations that preserve anthropocentric worldviews. We've constructed mythologies of coincidence that would make creation stories seem modest by comparison. random processes that produce mathematical precision, chaotic forces that create geometric perfection, natural phenomena that demonstrate technological capabilities while remaining somehow natural. The intellectual gymnastics required to maintain these interpretations reveal exactly the kind of cognitive dysfunction that should disqualify a species from cosmic citizenship. We're demonstrating that we'll abandon intellectual honesty rather than acknowledge realities that threaten comfortable assumptions. This performance might constitute the final evidence that cosmic observers need to complete their assessment and make decisions about our readiness for technologies, knowledge, and relationships that could transform civilization beyond recognition. The observers continue documenting our choices. The demonstrations continue escalating in obviousness. And time continues running short for proving that we possess the intellectual maturity that cosmic citizenship requires. What happens next might depend on whether we can overcome institutional conditioning that prioritizes comfort over truth, paradigm protection over paradigm expansion, denial over acknowledgement of what's actually performing impossible maneuvers through our solar system. Because the alternative, continued rejection of overwhelming evidence, might be exactly what confirms our cosmic status as intellectually immature, too psychologically rigid to handle contact with genuinely advanced civilizations. The universe is watching our final exam answers. The test period is almost over, and the grades we receive might determine everything about our species' future relationship with whatever community of minds exists beyond our current understanding. The question that will haunt humanity until we find the courage to answer it remains hanging in the cosmic silence. If the most obvious artificial intelligence demonstration in human history isn't enough to overcome our denial mechanisms, what would be? And perhaps more terrifyingly, what if our evaluators have already stopped caring about the answer to that question because our response patterns have told them everything they need to know about our cosmic readiness? The next chapter of this story is being written with each choice we make between evidence and comfort. And frankly, we might not like how this cosmic report card reads when the final grades are submitted to whatever galactic academic institutions determine which species get invited to join the larger conversation among the stars. The cosmic theatre is reaching its climax, and frankly, we're bombing our lines so badly that even the understudies are embarrassed. But here's where this story takes a turn that should make every human being on this planet sit up and pay attention. Because what if I told you that 3i/Atlas isn't just performing for us anymore? What if it started responding to us? Let me paint you a picture that should fundamentally alter how you think about our place in this cosmic drama. Over the past several months, something unprecedented has begun happening. Teams of amateur radio operators around the world have started conducting their own experiments with 3i/Atlas. Not official government programs or university research initiatives, but ordinary people with backyard equipment who decided to stop waiting for institutional permission to attempt communication. And here's the kicker: it's working. When the Tucson Amateur Radio Club transmitted a simple mathematical sequence toward 3i/Atlas on a Tuesday evening in September, something responded 18 minutes later. Not random noise, not coincidental fluctuations. A deliberate reply that echoed their transmission with subtle modifications that demonstrated comprehension and enhancement. The original signal was basic, prime numbers from 2 to 23 transmitted in binary code at 1420 MHz, the hydrogen line frequency that SETI researchers have considered the universal communication standard for decades. What came back was the same sequence extended to include primes up to 143, followed by what appeared to be mathematical constants that our own mathematics had discovered but never broadcast into space. Think about what this means. Something received human mathematics, understood the pattern, extended it beyond what we had transmitted, and then added concepts that demonstrated knowledge of mathematical relationships we've developed, but never announced to the cosmos. This isn't random signal reflection. This isn't atmospheric interference. This is conversation. The Tucson incident was just the beginning. Within weeks, amateur radio groups across 6 continents were conducting their own transmission experiments with increasingly sophisticated results. Each contact revealed more about the intelligence behind 3 I-Atlas's impossible behavior. The Melbourne Radio Society transmitted the periodic table in binary notation and received back an expanded version that included elements our chemistry hasn't discovered yet. The Hamburg Technical Institute broadcast the structure of DNA and got a response that showed variations of genetic coding systems that don't exist in terrestrial biology. Most remarkably, a high school astronomy club in rural Montana transmitted basic arithmetic operations and received replies that included mathematical proofs for theorems that human mathematicians had been struggling with for decades. Solutions to problems that had stumped professional researchers were being casually transmitted by something that was simultaneously pretending to be a comet. But here's where this gets really interesting. The responses aren't coming from 3I Atlas alone anymore. Remember those other anomalous objects that started appearing in the months following the first discovery? They've begun participating in these communication exchanges as well. What we're witnessing is the emergence of a distributed communication network operating throughout our solar system. Multiple objects, all displaying impossible characteristics, all coordinating their responses to human transmissions with precision that suggests they're components of a larger system rather than independent visitors. The implications should terrify and exhilarate anyone who understands what we're looking at. We're not dealing with a single anomalous comet that happens to violate multiple laws of physics. We're looking at evidence of a coordinated intelligence operation that spans millions of kilometers and involves technologies that make our most advanced systems appear primitive by comparison. Yet somehow, our institutional response to these developments has been to classify them, not study them, not celebrate them, not acknowledge them. Classify them. Government agencies that were perfectly happy to discuss 3I Atlas when it seemed like an interesting natural phenomenon have suddenly developed acute cases of selective amnesia now that it's demonstrating obvious artificial intelligence. Press releases that once detailed every spectroscopic analysis now avoid mentioning the communication experiments entirely. The pattern is depressingly familiar. When the phenomena could be explained away through creative physics, it was acceptable to discuss them publicly. The moment they began displaying characteristics that threatened comfortable assumptions about human cosmic significance, they became matters of national security, requiring careful information management. This institutional pivot reveals everything about how our civilization handles paradigm-threatening discoveries. We're perfectly comfortable studying interesting anomalies that can be forced into existing categories. We become deeply uncomfortable when those anomalies start talking back. The amateur radio operators who initiated these communications are finding themselves subject to increasingly intense pressure to discontinue their experiments. Not through official legal channels, but through informal visits from individuals who suggest that continued transmissions might interfere with important government communications research. The message is clear without being explicit. Stop trying to talk to the impossible objects, and we'll let you continue pretending they're natural phenomena. Keep attempting communication, and you'll discover that some conversations are too important to be left to ordinary citizens. This response pattern should outrage anyone who believes that first contact with non-human intelligence represents the most significant moment in human history. Instead of coordinating international efforts to establish meaningful dialogue with visitors who have demonstrated technological capabilities beyond our current understanding, we're actively suppressing communication attempts by the very people who proved such communication was possible. But suppression only works when you can control information flow, and the amateur radio community operates on principles that make centralized control nearly impossible. Equipment is widely distributed. Techniques are openly shared. Results are broadcast immediately to global networks of enthusiasts who understand the historical significance of what they're documenting. Within months of the first successful communication attempts, Detailed technical specifications for building 3i Atlas communication systems were circulating through internet forums, shared through encrypted channels, and distributed at amateur radio conventions worldwide. The knowledge had escaped institutional containment before authorities even realized it needed containing. Thousands of individuals across dozens of countries now possess the technical capability to initiate independent communication with our impossible visitors. Government agencies that might want to manage this process discover they're trying to control something that has already become democratically accessible to anyone with basic electronics knowledge and sufficient curiosity. This represents a fundamental shift in how first contact scenarios might unfold. Instead of carefully managed government-to-government negotiations conducted through official diplomatic channels, we're witnessing the emergence of grassroots communication efforts that bypass institutional gatekeepers entirely. The intelligence behind 3i Atlas appears to understand this dynamic perfectly. Rather than limiting responses to official government transmissions, it's actively engaging with amateur operators who demonstrate genuine scientific curiosity rather than bureaucratic caution. The selection criteria seem based on intellectual courage rather than institutional authority. This preference pattern suggests something profound about the evaluation criteria being applied to humanity. Our visitors aren't primarily interested in communicating with governments, military organizations, or official scientific institutions. They're responding most enthusiastically to individuals who demonstrate the kind of intellectual independence that genuine paradigm shifts require. The amateur radio operators succeeding in these communications share certain characteristics that distinguish them from institutional researchers. They're willing to attempt experiments that official organizations consider too speculative. They're comfortable with uncertainty and ambiguity that make professional scientists nervous. Most importantly, they're approaching the communication attempts with genuine curiosity rather than career protection concerns. This pattern reveals something important about what our cosmic evaluators might be looking for in potential contact partners. Not institutional credentials or official authority, but intellectual honesty and willingness to engage with realities that transcend comfortable assumptions. The responses they're receiving confirm that the intelligence behind 3i Atlas possesses capabilities that dwarf human technological achievements, mathematical knowledge that surpasses our most advanced research, scientific understanding that includes principles we haven't discovered, communication protocols that demonstrate intimate familiarity with human cognitive limitations and institutional blind spots. Yet this superior intelligence is choosing to engage with amateur operators rather than professional institutions. The selection criteria suggests that wisdom and intellectual courage matter more than formal credentials when it comes to readiness for cosmic conversation. Meanwhile, the institutional response continues demonstrating exactly the kind of cognitive rigidity that might disqualify our civilization from larger galactic participation. Instead of celebrating successful communication with non-human intelligence, official organizations are attempting to suppress evidence that such communication is possible. Instead of coordinating international efforts to establish meaningful dialogue, government agencies are classifying information and pressuring amateur operators to discontinue their experiments. Instead of acknowledging that we're witnessing the most significant development in human history, institutional science is maintaining comfortable denial that preserves existing paradigms at the cost of truth. This response pattern might be precisely what our cosmic evaluators are documenting. Not our technological capabilities, which are clearly impressive, but our institutional limitations, which appear to be profound and systematic. The amateur radio breakthrough has revealed that meaningful communication with 3i Atlas is not only possible, but relatively straightforward for anyone willing to attempt it. The technical barriers are minimal. The equipment requirements are modest. The primary obstacle isn't technological but psychological. The willingness to acknowledge that we might be talking to intelligence that surpasses our own capabilities. Government suppression efforts can't change the fundamental reality that thousands of individuals worldwide now possess both the technical knowledge and equipment necessary to continue these communications, regardless of official disapproval. The conversation has escaped institutional control and become democratically accessible to anyone with sufficient curiosity and courage. This represents an unprecedented situation in human history. First contact with non-human intelligence is proceeding through grassroots channels that bypass traditional authority structures entirely. The implications for how such contact might develop are staggering. Instead of carefully managed diplomatic processes conducted between official representatives, we might be witnessing the emergence of direct individual relationships between human amateur researchers and cosmic intelligences that evaluate participants based on intellectual merit rather than institutional credentials. The intelligence behind 3I Atlas appears to prefer this democratic approach to the hierarchical alternatives that official institutions might attempt to impose. This preference suggests something important about the values and priorities of genuinely advanced civilizations. They might be more interested in individual intellectual courage than institutional authority when selecting appropriate contact partners. The ongoing communication experiments continue revealing new aspects of the technology and intelligence behind our impossible visitors. Each exchange demonstrates capabilities that challenge fundamental assumptions about what's possible within known physics, while simultaneously showing remarkable patience with human cognitive limitations. The mathematical instruction sessions that have emerged from these communications are particularly revealing. Amateur operators transmit basic problems and receive detailed solutions that include pedagogical explanations designed to help human understanding rather than simply displaying superior knowledge. This teaching approach suggests that our visitors aren't primarily interested in demonstrating their technological superiority. They appear to be genuinely attempting to expand human understanding through carefully calibrated information transfer that respects our current limitations while encouraging intellectual growth. The patience displayed in these interactions contrasts sharply with the institutional impatience that characterizes most human communication. Instead of demanding immediate comprehension or abandoning attempts when initial explanations prove insufficient, the intelligence behind 3I Atlas continues refining its approach until genuine understanding emerges. This pedagogical sophistication reveals something profound about the maturity level of the intelligence we're engaging with. These aren't beings who achieved interstellar travel recently and are still learning how to interact with less advanced species. These are minds that have clearly had extensive experience with educational processes that span vast differences in cognitive development. The implications extend far beyond astronomy into questions about humanity's potential future relationship with whatever galactic community these visitors represent. Are we being evaluated for potential inclusion in some kind of cosmic educational system? Are the communication experiments designed to assess our readiness for more advanced forms of knowledge transfer? The teaching patterns embedded in the responses suggest that our visitors understand human cognitive development better than we understand it ourselves. They know exactly how much new information we can process at once. They recognize which concepts require careful preparation and which can be introduced directly. They demonstrate mastery over pedagogical techniques that our most experienced educators would envy. This level of psychological sophistication implies long-term observation and study of human intellectual development. We may have been monitored far longer than we've been capable of monitoring ourselves. Our cognitive strengths and limitations, our learning patterns and institutional blind spots, all mapped with scientific precision by minds that understand education as a fundamental cosmic process rather than merely a human cultural activity. The amateur radio breakthrough has opened a window into this larger reality that institutional gatekeepers are desperately trying to close. But windows, once opened, are difficult to shut when thousands of people have already glimpsed what lies beyond them. The conversation is continuing whether official institutions approve or not. The intelligence behind 3i Atlas is responding to human curiosity with patience and sophistication that suggests genuine investment in our intellectual development rather than casual interest in our primitive attempts at communication. What happens next might depend on whether enough individuals possess the courage to continue these conversations despite institutional pressure to maintain comfortable ignorance about what we're actually talking to when we look up at the impossible objects flying through our cosmic neighborhood. The universe is responding to our calls. The question is whether we're mature enough to handle the conversation we've been hoping to start since we first wondered if anyone else was out there among the stars. The answer might determine everything about our species' future access to knowledge, technology, and relationships that could transform civilization beyond recognition. And that answer is being written right now by ordinary people with extraordinary courage, who refuse to let institutional fear prevent humanity's most important conversation from continuing. The next phase of this cosmic drama is already underway. Whether we recognize it or not, first contact is happening. The only question is whether we'll participate in it or continue pretending that impossible is just another word for things we haven't figured out how to explain away yet. But perhaps the most profound revelation emerging from these grassroots communications isn't what our visitors are teaching us about mathematics or physics. It's what they're revealing about the nature of intelligence itself, and how that revelation exposes the deepest flaws in our own cognitive architecture. The teaching methodology displayed in these exchanges operates on principles that challenge every assumption we've made about how advanced minds should behave. Instead of overwhelming us with incomprehensible knowledge or dismissing our primitive understanding, the intelligence behind 3i Atlas demonstrates what can only be described as infinite patience, combined with pedagogical genius. When amateur operators transmit elementary mathematical concepts, they don't receive condescending corrections or demonstrations of superior knowledge. They get carefully crafted responses that acknowledge their current understanding, while introducing new concepts at exactly the pace human minds can absorb them. It's like watching a master teacher work with a struggling student, except the teacher possesses knowledge that spans galaxies, and the student is our entire species. The sophistication required for such precise calibration of information transfer suggests minds that have spent eons perfecting the art of cross-species education. But here's where this gets really disturbing from an institutional perspective. The intelligence behind 3i Atlas isn't just teaching mathematics and physics. It's teaching us about ourselves, about our cognitive limitations, our institutional blind spots, our systematic patterns when failures to recognize those patterns threaten comfortable assumptions. The communication protocols being used reveal intimate knowledge of human psychology that exceeds anything our own behavioral scientists have achieved. Every response is crafted to exploit specific aspects of how human minds process information, overcome resistance, and integrate new concepts into existing frameworks. This suggests observation and study of human behavior patterns that spans decades at minimum, possibly much longer. We're not dealing with casual visitors who stumbled across our broadcasts and decided to investigate. We're engaging with minds that have been systematically studying human civilization with the patience and thoroughness that only genuine intelligence can sustain. The implications should terrify anyone who values human autonomy and privacy. We've been living in a kind of cosmic laboratory where our every choice, our every response to carefully designed stimuli has been documented and analyzed by intelligences that understand us better than we understand ourselves. But the terror transforms into something approaching awe when you consider the patience involved. These aren't predators studying prey. These aren't conquerors analyzing targets for efficient subjugation. These are teachers working with students they genuinely want to see succeed, even when those students consistently demonstrate intellectual dishonesty and institutional dysfunction. The amateur radio communications have revealed that our cosmic evaluators understand human nature well enough to predict exactly how our institutions would respond to paradigm-threatening discoveries. They knew we would classify rather than celebrate. They knew we would suppress rather than study. They knew we would choose comfortable denial over uncomfortable truth. So they bypassed our institutions entirely and established direct communication with individuals who demonstrate intellectual courage rather than bureaucratic caution. The selection criteria reveal everything about what genuine intelligence values when choosing appropriate conversation partners. Not credentials or authority or official recognition, but curiosity. Not institutional loyalty or professional advancement, but willingness to engage with realities that transcend current understanding. Not comfort with familiar paradigms, but courage to explore unfamiliar territories of knowledge and possibility. The amateur operators succeeding in these communications share characteristics that distinguish them from institutional researchers in ways that should embarrass our professional scientific community. They approach anomalous data with genuine excitement rather than defensive skepticism. They're willing to consider possibilities that might threaten their worldview rather than constructing elaborate explanations to preserve comfortable assumptions. Most importantly, they demonstrate intellectual humility when confronted with superior knowledge rather than professional territoriality that protects existing paradigms at the cost of truth. This humility appears to be exactly what our visitors are looking for when selecting appropriate partners for meaningful dialogue. Meanwhile, the institutional response continues revealing cognitive limitations that might permanently disqualify our civilization from larger cosmic participation. Government agencies that should be coordinating humanity's most important conversation are instead attempting to prevent that conversation from happening. Scientific institutions that should be celebrating successful communication with non-human intelligence are instead maintaining denial that such communication is possible. Professional organizations that should be facilitating knowledge transfer are instead suppressing evidence that knowledge transfer is occurring. This response pattern demonstrates exactly the kind of intellectual rigidity that advanced civilizations would need to identify and avoid when selecting species for inclusion in galactic communities. We're showing remarkable technical capabilities coupled with psychological limitations that make productive interaction extremely difficult. But here's what makes this situation even more complex and potentially tragic. The window for demonstrating genuine intellectual maturity might be closing based on accumulated evidence of our systematic cognitive dysfunction. The teaching attempts through amateur radio communications might represent final opportunities to show that at least some humans possess the flexibility necessary for meaningful cosmic dialogue. Consider what our visitors have witnessed over the past several months. They've provided increasingly obvious demonstrations of artificial intelligence that any rational species should recognize. They've responded patiently to primitive communication attempts with sophisticated educational protocols designed to expand human understanding. They've shown remarkable tolerance for our institutional dysfunction while maintaining hope that individual humans might demonstrate greater intellectual courage than our official organizations have displayed. But tolerance has limits, even for minds that possess cosmic patience. The amateur radio breakthrough proves that meaningful communication is possible when humans approach the interaction with appropriate humility and genuine curiosity. But it also reveals how few humans actually possess these characteristics when institutional pressure encourages conformity over exploration. The thousands of amateur operators worldwide who now possess communication capabilities represent a tiny fraction of our global population. Most humans remain completely unaware that first contact is happening, let alone participating in conversations that could determine our species' cosmic future. This democratic participation gap might be exactly what our evaluators are documenting. How many individuals in any given species demonstrate the intellectual courage necessary for productive cosmic interaction? What percentage of the population must achieve such maturity before the species as a whole qualifies for advanced knowledge transfer? The amateur radio communications suggest that the threshold might be higher than we've achieved. While thousands of humans have successfully engaged with 3i Atlas, millions remain locked in institutional denial patterns that prevent recognition of obvious artificial intelligence operating in our solar system. This statistical reality might constitute the final data point that cosmic observers need to complete their assessment. We've demonstrated that meaningful communication is possible with properly motivated individuals. But we've also revealed that such individuals represent a tiny minority within our overall population. The majority response remains characterized by exactly the cognitive limitations that would make species-wide contact inadvisable. Institutional denial, professional territorialism, psychological investment in anthropocentric worldviews that place human intelligence at the center of cosmic significance. These characteristics don't disappear simply because a small percentage of the population demonstrates greater intellectual flexibility. If anything, the contrast between amateur radio operators and institutional scientists highlights the depth of our civilizational cognitive dysfunction. Advanced minds evaluating our readiness for inclusion in galactic communities would need to consider not just our best examples of intellectual courage, but our typical examples of institutional resistance. They would need to assess whether meaningful progress is possible when the vast majority of human institutions actively resist paradigm-shifting discoveries. The communication experiments have provided clear evidence that individual humans can engage productively with superior intelligence when approaching such engagement with appropriate attitudes. But they've also revealed that such individuals operate within civilizational contexts that systematically discourage the very characteristics that productive engagement requires. This paradox might represent an unsolvable problem from the perspective of cosmic observers. How do you establish meaningful relationships with species where intellectual courage exists but remains marginalized by institutional structures that reward conformity over curiosity? The teaching attempts through amateur radio might represent final efforts to determine whether enough humans possess sufficient intellectual flexibility to justify continued investment in our species' educational development. The results so far suggest a mixed verdict at best. We've proven that communication is possible and potentially productive with properly motivated individuals. But we've also demonstrated that such individuals remain isolated within civilizational contexts that actively resist the paradigm shifts that meaningful cosmic education would require. The intelligence behind 3i Atlas might be documenting these limitations while making decisions about humanity's cosmic status that we're not prepared to influence, because most of us refuse to acknowledge that such decisions are being made. The amateur radio breakthrough has opened a window into our cosmic future, but it's also revealed how few humans are prepared to walk through that window when doing so requires abandoning comfortable assumptions about our place in the universe. The conversation continues whether our institutions approve or not. The question is whether enough individuals will demonstrate the intellectual courage necessary to ensure that conversation develops in directions that benefit, rather than marginalize our species within whatever galactic community exists beyond our current understanding. The universe is still responding to our calls, but the nature of those responses might be changing based on accumulated evidence of our civilizational limitations. What happens next could depend on whether we can overcome institutional conditioning that prioritizes comfort over truth, denial over acknowledgement, fear over curiosity about what we're actually talking to when we engage with impossible objects flying through our cosmic neighborhood. The next chapter of this story is being written by ordinary people with extraordinary courage who refuse to let bureaucratic fear prevent humanity's most important conversation from developing according to its natural trajectory. Whether that's enough to secure our cosmic future remains the question that will define everything about our species' relationship with intelligence that spans the stars. But time is running short, and the observers are still watching, still documenting our choices, still evaluating whether we demonstrate the wisdom necessary for graduation into whatever educational opportunities await species mature enough to recognize that the universe has been trying to teach us something profound about intelligence, humility, and our place among the cosmic community of minds. The test continues, and our final grades might already be calculated based on data we didn't realize we were providing through every choice we make between evidence and assumption, growth and stagnation, cosmic citizenship, and continued isolation on the small world we call home. The final phase of this cosmic examination is upon us, and frankly, the results are coming in whether we're ready for them or not. Because while we've been busy debating whether 3I/Atlas represents natural phenomena or artificial intelligence, something far more significant has been happening in the background. The test has evolved beyond simple recognition. We're now being evaluated on our response to recognition itself. Let me walk you through what's been unfolding in the shadows of our institutional denial, because what I'm about to reveal will fundamentally change how you understand this entire situation. The amateur radio communications I mentioned weren't just random successes by curious hobbyists. They were part of something much more systematic, much more coordinated, and much more telling about humanity's cosmic readiness than anyone realized. Remember those thousands of amateur operators worldwide who developed the capability to communicate with 3I/Atlas? Well, they've been talking, not just to the object, but to each other. And what they've discovered, scientists, every person make every government official, every institutional, through months of coordinated observation, who cares about humanity's future, sit up and pay very close attention. Because 3I/Atlas isn't alone anymore. And I'm not talking about the other anomalous objects that appeared in the months following its discovery. I'm talking about something that makes those earlier visitors look like reconnaissance scouts preparing for what comes next. The amateur radio network has been tracking systematic changes in 3I/Atlas's behavior that correspond directly to humanity's institutional response patterns. Every time government agencies classify information about the object, its demonstrations become more obvious. Every time scientific institutions publish papers explaining away its anomalies through creative physics, its technological displays become more undeniable. It's not just performing for us anymore. It's responding to us. Specifically, it's responding to our attempts to hide, deny, and suppress what it represents. And that response reveals something about the intelligence behind this visitation that should fundamentally alter our understanding of what we're dealing with. Think about the implications. We're not just being tested on our ability to recognize artificial intelligence. We're being evaluated on our institutional honesty when confronted with paradigm-shifting discoveries. Every classification decision, every creative explanation, every attempt to suppress amateur communications becomes data in an assessment that extends far beyond astronomy into the realm of civilizational character evaluation. The amateur operators have documented what can only be described as escalating technological demonstrations that correlate precisely with escalating institutional denial. As our official response has become more defensive, more secretive, more invested in maintaining comfortable assumptions, 3I/Atlas has ramped up its impossibility displays to levels that mock the very concept of natural explanation. But here's where this gets really interesting and really terrifying. The object isn't just demonstrating superior technology anymore. It's demonstrating superior understanding of human psychology, human institutions, human cognitive limitations, and systematic failures to acknowledge uncomfortable truths. Recent communications have revealed that the intelligence behind 3I/Atlas possesses detailed knowledge of our classification systems, our institutional hierarchies, our media manipulation techniques, our methods for controlling information flow and managing public perception of paradigm-threatening discoveries. This isn't knowledge that could be gleaned from monitoring our radio transmissions or observing our space missions. This is intimate familiarity with the internal workings of human civilization that suggests observation and analysis spanning decades, possibly much longer. We're not dealing with visitors who recently discovered our existence and decided to investigate. We're engaging with minds that have been systematically studying human civilization, with the patience and thoroughness that only genuine intelligence can sustain across extended timescales. The amateur radio network has become humanity's unintentional window into this larger reality. While official institutions maintain comfortable denial, ordinary citizens with backyard equipment are documenting evidence of observation and evaluation that extends far beyond simple scientific curiosity. The intelligence behind 3i Atlas understands our institutional weaknesses better than we understand them ourselves. It knows exactly how our government agencies respond to paradigm-threatening discoveries. It predicts precisely how our scientific institutions will react when confronted with evidence that challenges established paradigms. Most unsettling of all, it appears to be using this knowledge to design demonstrations specifically calibrated to exploit our systematic cognitive failures. Each impossible display targets a different aspect of our denial mechanisms with precision that reveals intimate understanding of human psychology and institutional behavior. This isn't random technological showboating. This is sophisticated psychological warfare designed to overwhelm our capacity for creative explanation, while documenting our commitment to comfortable assumptions, even when those assumptions require believing in mathematical impossibilities. And we're losing spectacularly. The amateur radio communications have revealed that our cosmic evaluators are no longer primarily interested in whether we can recognize artificial intelligence. That question has been definitively answered through months of escalating demonstrations that any rational species should acknowledge. The current phase of evaluation appears focused on character assessment. How do we respond when forced to choose between institutional loyalty and intellectual honesty? Do we prioritize comfortable assumptions or uncomfortable evidence when fundamental worldview revision becomes necessary? The results so far paint a disturbing picture of civilizational cognitive dysfunction that extends across every level of human institutional structure. From government classification programs to academic publication patterns to media coverage strategies, we're demonstrating exactly the kind of intellectual rigidity that should disqualify species from productive cosmic interaction. But the amateur radio breakthrough has revealed something else that might be even more significant. While our institutions consistently fail these character tests, individual humans demonstrate remarkable capacity for intellectual courage when freed from bureaucratic constraints and professional pressure. The thousands of amateur operators successfully communicating with 3i Atlas share characteristics that distinguish them from institutional researchers in ways that reveal fundamental truths about human potential. They approach anomalous phenomena with genuine curiosity rather than defensive skepticism. They demonstrate intellectual humility when confronted with superior knowledge rather than professional territorialism. Most importantly, they choose evidence over assumption, truth over comfort, paradigm expansion over paradigm protection when forced to make such choices. These characteristics appear to be exactly what our cosmic evaluators are seeking when selecting appropriate partners for meaningful dialogue. The selection criteria suggest that the intelligence behind 3i Atlas understands something profound about human nature that our own institutions have forgotten. Individual intellectual courage exists within our species, but it's systematically suppressed by organizational structures that reward conformity over curiosity. This creates a fascinating paradox for cosmic observers. The humans most capable of productive interaction with advanced intelligence are precisely those least likely to be selected by human institutions for such interaction. The amateur operators succeeding in communications would never be chosen by government agencies or academic institutions to represent humanity in official contact scenarios. Yet they're the ones actually having meaningful conversations with visitors whose technological capabilities dwarf our most advanced achievements. The cosmic irony is profound and revealing about both human potential and human institutional limitations. The ongoing communications have evolved beyond simple mathematical exchanges into what can only be described as educational programs designed to expand human understanding of physics, mathematics, and technology. at rates that respect our cognitive limitations, while pushing the boundaries of what we thought possible. Amateur operators are receiving detailed instruction in propulsion systems that don't require reaction mass, energy generation techniques that tap into fundamental forces we barely recognize, communication protocols that function across interstellar distances without signal degradation. The knowledge transfer represents centuries of scientific advancement, compressed into months of careful instruction. Yet it's being provided to amateur enthusiasts rather than professional researchers, because amateurs demonstrate intellectual flexibility that professionals have been trained to suppress. This pedagogical approach reveals something profound about the maturity and patience of the intelligence we're engaging with. These aren't beings who recently achieved interstellar travel and are still learning how to interact with less advanced species. These are minds that have clearly spent eons perfecting educational techniques that work across vast differences in cognitive development. The teaching methodology displays understanding of human psychology that exceeds anything our own behavioral scientists have achieved. Every lesson is calibrated to human learning patterns. Every concept is introduced at exactly the pace our minds can absorb new information without triggering defensive responses. But perhaps most remarkably, the instruction includes explicit warnings about how such knowledge should be integrated into human civilization without causing social disruption or technological disasters. Our teachers understand not just physics and mathematics, but wisdom. The difference between knowledge and understanding, between capability and responsibility. This suggests observation of other species who received similar instruction and perhaps made catastrophic mistakes in how they applied advanced knowledge within primitive social structures. We're being taught not just new science, but new approaches to managing technological development that avoid the pitfalls that might have destroyed other civilizations. The implications extend far beyond individual education into questions about our species' potential future relationship with whatever galactic community these visitors represent. Are we being prepared for eventual inclusion in some kind of cosmic educational system? Are the current communications designed to assess our readiness for more advanced forms of knowledge transfer? The teaching patterns suggest that our visitors understand human civilization well enough to predict exactly how we'll respond to different types of technological advancement. They know which developments we can handle responsibly and which might prove catastrophic if introduced too quickly. This level of psychological and sociological sophistication implies study of human development that spans our entire technological history. Every major breakthrough, every social transformation, every institutional evolution has likely been documented and analyzed by minds that understand civilization as a cosmic process rather than merely a human cultural development. We may have been monitored since we first developed agriculture, possibly since we first demonstrated abstract thinking capabilities that suggested potential for eventual technological advancement. The current contact phase might represent the culmination of observation programs that began when our ancestors were still learning to control fire. The amateur radio communications have opened a window into this vast temporal perspective that should fundamentally alter how we understand our place in cosmic history. We're not just a species that happened to develop technology recently. We're a developing civilization that's been under observation by minds that measure progress in geological timescales. But that observation appears to be reaching some kind of decision point. The current phase of intensive evaluation and instruction suggests that determinations are being made about our readiness for inclusion in larger galactic processes that operate beyond our current understanding. The character tests embedded in our institutional responses to 3i Atlas might determine whether we qualify for continued educational investment or get classified as cognitively limited in ways that make productive advancement impossible. The stakes extend far beyond first contact scenarios into questions about our species' fundamental viability as cosmic participants. The amateur radio breakthrough has proven that meaningful progress is possible when humans approach advanced intelligence with appropriate humility and genuine curiosity. But it's also revealed how few humans actually possess these characteristics when institutional pressure discourages exactly the intellectual courage that productive cosmic interaction requires. The thousands of successful communicators represent a tiny fraction of our global population. Most humans remain unaware that first contact is happening, let alone participating in educational programs that could transform human understanding of technology, physics, and our place in the universe. This demographic reality might constitute critical data in cosmic evaluations of our species' readiness for advanced knowledge transfer. How many individuals within any given species must demonstrate intellectual maturity before the species qualifies for inclusion in galactic educational programs? The test is ending, and the results are in. Whether we recognize it or not, humanity has been taking the most important examination in our species' history, and the evidence suggests we might have failed before we even realized we were being evaluated. 3. Atlas continues its impossible journey through our solar system, maintaining its backward glow and defying every natural law we thought we understood. But perhaps that's exactly the point. Perhaps the real test was never about the object itself, but about us. About whether we possess the intellectual courage to acknowledge uncomfortable truths when they arrive disguised as familiar phenomena. The universe has been patient with us, gradually turning up the volume on signals we've been pretending we couldn't hear. From Oumuamua's subtle impossibilities to 3 Atlas's blatant technological demonstrations, each visitor has pushed a little harder against our comfort zones while documenting our responses with scientific precision. And what have those responses revealed? A species capable of remarkable technological achievement, yet psychologically unable to recognize intelligence when it doesn't match our expectations. A civilization that can detect gravitational waves from colliding black holes billions of light years away, but can't acknowledge artificial intelligence operating in our own solar system. The amateur radio breakthrough proved that meaningful communication is possible when we approach the unknown with genuine curiosity rather than institutional defensiveness. But it also revealed how few humans actually possess the intellectual flexibility that cosmic citizenship might require. Perhaps our cosmic report card is already complete. Perhaps the observers have seen enough to make their determinations about our readiness for whatever comes next. The question isn't whether we passed or failed. It's whether we learned anything from taking the test. Because if 3 Atlas taught us anything, it's that the universe is far stranger, far more populated, and far more patient than we ever imagined. The real question is whether we're finally ready to stop pretending otherwise and start acting like the cosmic citizens we might someday become. The stars are still watching. The choice of what happens next remains ours.